one second. 30 seconds. Oh, just look at it.
Okay, the time is 5 o'clock and we do have quorum present, so I will call this special meeting of the Plan Commission to order. There's a few things that I want to take care of before we get going. One thing is use the mic, because that helps everybody be able to hear, and we are being recorded, so that helps that. So use the mic, please. And we will be somewhat more informal than we are at regular Plan Commission meetings, so just to alert you to that. Also, I invited members of the Transportation Commission to join us if they were able, and I think Robbie is the only one who took us up on that, Robbie Weber, and of course Chris McCahill is on Plan Commission and on Transportation Commission. But we may get others, and I did invite Transportation Commission people to come to the table if they were able to come. It seems like, oh yeah, and we've got 3 people who are not going to be here, Alder, Duncan, and Field, and I'm pretty sure Gabe Mendez is also not going to be able to make it, which is disappointing because I think we do cover a lot of good stuff here, and I like to get the input and questions and ideas from all members, but we're all busy, so.
Excuse me, Chair. Commissioner Basine said she'd be just a few minutes late.
Oh, okay, great. Thank you for letting me know. Okay, so I don't believe we have any comments, general comments. Okay.
Excuse me. I filled out a registration thing. It didn't say what to do with it.
Oh. I'll take that.
Yes.
Will you have registered for each item?
I did.
Okay.
Okay, so you registered for each item then?
Yes.
Okay, great. We'll call on you then.
And the public comment.
And the public comment. Okay, then go ahead.
Thanks.
You have 3 minutes. Yeah, come up there. So Alex Salutos, go ahead. Yeah, press the button so the green comes on.
Okay, it's new
Good.
technology for me. Thank you for your interest in making improvements to the zoning code and the approval processes. You have a lot on your plate, and I appreciate your services as volunteers. These can be complicated and messy issues that have a big impact on our community and the quality of our lives. And I know all of us want to build the best community possible. While the items on your agenda today are all important, I'm speaking in the public comment period because I wanted to ask if we could just step back for a couple of reasons. The first is, when I read these three packages, my first question is why? What's the problem and what's the vision or goals? Of the 3, one of them halfway through had a slide with some of the goals in it. And as an outsider looking in, I'm trying to figure out, well, what's going on here? So if you could articulate, as Steve Covey says, begin with the end in mind. What's the problem you're trying to solve, or what's the vision here of success? And if you could make that more clear for us, I think that would help everyone get aligned and be able to make a contribution. 2, based on how zoning code ordinance changes have been managed, including the recent changes to the definition of family in the zoning code, changes to the zoning ordinance regarding the location of parking in mixed-use zoning districts in response to the Barnes decision, and changes to the zoning code to narrow the terrace along East Washington Avenue. I have concerns about the transparency and inclusiveness of the process. So For that reason, I've got a couple of requests. One, bring back the Zoning Code Advisory Committee to handle these changes and any other changes to the zoning code, so it's a more inclusive and transparent process, and we've got a tremendous amount of experience from stakeholders looking at these, what might appear to be small changes from different perspectives that can address the unintended consequences they may have. And then two, I asked that, how are you collecting ideas for improvement? How come these came forward? What input from key stakeholders have you gotten? So I asked that you continue collecting ideas and input from key stakeholders on ways to improve the zoning code and the processes for approval, and put them in a parking lot until the advisory committee can handle them. And then, correct me if I'm wrong, the new planning director arrives in August. She's not here yet, if I'm correct. But
Thank you, Alex.
put them on hold until she's...
Include your available time on
one
this
sentence
item.
here.
And I will call you then on the other items. Thank you. Next is disclosures and recusals. Members of the body should make any required disclosures or recusals under the city's ethics code. Any disclosures or recusals? Seeing none, then we will move on to the special items of business. The first item is overview and discussion on parking and loading considerations. This is on, all of these are on the agenda as a result of input and meetings and discussions with individual Plan Commission members to find out from each member what they were concerned about, what they thought we needed more information about, what might be able to be improved or changed. So this first one, there is an identification of issues such as double parking, parking in bike lanes, parking in bus lanes, the change in our economy, really, to have so much more that is delivered directly to individuals rather than people going to stores to shop, and we really have not adjusted our loading criteria to really face that kind of issue. So that's where this one came from, and we do have today several people, staff people, who are going to help us go through that and learn a little bit more about it, and then we want to have some input from you all or discussion or questions. Why don't we first hear from Alex Salutos. He neither supports nor opposes, but wishes to speak. So this is focused, Alex, on overview and discussion on parking and loading considerations, and you have 3 minutes.
Thanks, Madam Chair. This of the 3 packages was the only one that had the problems to address, which is great. I ask that before you get into the weeds, you say what's the vision or what's the goals? Where do you want to wind up with this that crafts the ordinance? 2, I didn't get into the detail, but with the current process on zoning changes, what's happened recently is that the public sees of the ordinance change is when it's introduced at the council, and then the die has been cast and it's a fait accompli. And in my experience with multiple ordinance changes, there may be some discussion, there may be deliberations, but they're approved without changes. And even though we can testify for 3 minutes at a public hearing, there isn't meaningful public engagement in it, and it's not used. And then secondly, if you're going to limit testimony to 3 minutes and cut people off at 3 minutes, give them the courtesy of saying you've got 30 seconds left or 15 seconds left versus mid-sentence saying you're done and the microphone goes off. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Any questions of Alex before we hear from staff? No, seeing no raised hands, and I've got to look for the actual raised hands, then we will hear from staff in terms of going through the slides. And could you all introduce yourselves?
Sure. Can we just make sure? Green sheet we had. I just want to make sure. Could I just check to make sure we don't have anyone else registered to speak on this item? Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so would you three please go ahead and introduce yourselves?
Sure. I'm Sean Moy with the Traffic Engineering Division.
Trent Schultz. I'm the Transportation Demand Management Coordinator with the Parking Division.
I'm Stephanie Cox. I'm the Parking Division Manager.
Okay, very good. And do you want people to ask questions as you go along, or? Yes, okay. So go ahead.
And I will actually kick it off. I got a few slides here.
okay,
I just
very
also
good.
note that Zoning Administrator Katie Bannon and Assistant City Attorney Kate Smith are also here if there's questions related to their areas of expertise as well. So they're also here. But yes, please, in the spirit of discussion, if you have questions along here, hopefully this isn't being done lecture format. This is just kind of a discussion. So if you want clarification, let's do that as we go. That's great. Again, Kevin Furco, Principal Planner in the Planning Division, and I helped kind of structure some of this, and I will turn it over to colleagues here in a moment, but a few slides here just to talk about kind of setting the table here. And as far as the background information, just kind of what we're going to talk about here in the first hour of our work session this evening. I'm going to talk about reviewing key parking and loading standards. We're going to talk about management plans and some of the tools the Plan Commission has to make recommendations. We want to talk a little bit and definitely turn over to my colleagues in transportation and parking to talk about right-of-way regulations and considerations, and also how they recommend conditions to this body when they come before them. And then finally, I'm going to talk about a new initiative, and as they will mention, this is a brand new addition. It's a brand new initiative. And so this is a very early and a very high level overview of the curb management initiative, but it ties in nicely with some of these considerations about parking, loading, and what happens in the right-of-way, which again, the Plan Commission review sometimes related to that, but the Plan Commission is not typically a reviewing or approving body for items in the right-of-way.
And so a comment on that, presumably those kinds of things can be changed through ordinance if there's an issue with them. So for example, and this I think would impact Plan Commission, if there is a determination that the current loading standards or requirements are not adequate given changes that we've experienced and what's happening, then an ordinance change might be in order.
Thanks, Chair. And then just really quickly, and again, Katie can fill in any more detailed questions, but starting with the zoning code is the code that we deal with primarily, I think, for many of the Plan Commission's considerations. A loading zone or loading spot is required for certain uses. Office, retail, industrial, commercial, wholesale uses all require a certain space or spaces depending on the size of the building. So that is a requirement in the zoning code. It's based on the size of a building in most cases. But again, for the issue here of residential, there is not a loading zone that's required for a residential use. So an on-site loading facility is not required in the zoning code for a residential use.
Would you define residential?
Residential, so let's just say an apartment building, building with dwelling unit or units, or a mixed-use building with dwelling unit or units. There is not a requirement in the zoning code that there has to be an off-site loading space. But loading may be a consideration for conditional uses, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a couple of slides. Just talking generally about parking, no on-site parking is required in the downtown areas. No on-site parking is required in transit-oriented development areas within the overlay district. And most of the zoning districts themselves do not have minimum parking requirements. However, as noted at the bottom of the slide, there are a few instances where a parking requirement would come in. For example, single-user buildings larger than 10,000 square feet, multi-tenant buildings larger than 25,000 square feet in area, and when you have a restaurant tavern within 300 feet of another restaurant tavern. Those are the instances when parking there would be a minimum parking requirement in the zoning code. I mentioned this just at the overview. This was included as an appendix in the back of the slide deck, but this is the management template that our zoning office has put together. This came at the request of a couple of alders, and I think even some plan commission members, to have a formalized framework of when we say a management plan, and it could address a variety of issues to address the potential impacts of residential development or other developments. But again, this one right here is specifically for the apartment management plan. It was in your packets. There is a hard copy at your spaces. But a management plan could include delivery, rideshare, loading plans, vehicle and moped parking management, trash management, move in and move out strategies. So that is something that the Plan Commission, if they do recommend a management plan, this is the form we recommend they use in order to standardize that process. And we talk about conditional uses, and we have an item coming up later this evening to dig a little bit deeper in conditional uses. But when reviewing a conditional use, as the Commission knows, you have to find certain standards are met. And when we're dealing with loading-related issues, I believe the most relevant standard that the Plan Commission could rely on in terms of addressing this would be Conditional Use Standard 5. Has to do with the adequacy of utilities, access roads, internal circulation improvements for pedestrians, bicyclists, transit vehicles, parking considerations, and so forth. So I won't read it here. It's in your packet. It's on Legistar. But Conditional Use Standard 5 is among the standards that relate to loading and parking considerations where applicable. So I'm going to now turn it over to Sean. I'm Sean with Traffic Engineering. I'll talk a little bit about some of the comments that TE has and kind of an overview of your role in the right-of-way and loading considerations.
Yeah, so we have two typical standard, I guess, loading comments that we have put on most developments. We have our commercial delivery plan comment, which you've probably seen many times, and the waste removal comments. Those, are kind of our typical comments that we put on projects when applicable. We typically haven't required or recommended short-term parking spaces, with our Plan Commission comments. It's just not something that we've, typically recommended because we've had, some concerns about, the enforceability of it and the use because, they're really kind of directed at, the third party. So, we've had some challenges there. So we've kind of, had our comments, the commercial delivery plan that can be controlled by, the development, the tenant, they can control, where most of their deliveries go. So, we look at that, they look for location, the turning movements, all that good stuff. We do, grant loading zones, where appropriate, if there are, issues or, I guess in areas where we deem appropriate, a lot of times it's more in the urban area. So yeah, that's kind of our two basic comments that we've put on most developments.
If people have questions as we go along, chime in. Robbie.
And excuse me for not being a Plan Commission member, so I just need a definition. On the opening slide, as far as minimum parking requirements, it said that multi-tenant buildings over 25,000 feet do have minimum parking requirements, I guess. And does that mean multiple office tenants, multiple residential tenants, or both? I'm just looking for a definition.
I defer to zoning on that one, but my sense is a building that would have multiple leasable or multiple tenant spaces within it, wouldn't have to be, two offices, it'd be an office and a retail but think of a building that's got more than one tenant.
So, but I meant, like multiple apartments, for instance.
Well, for that one, yeah, I guess I'd look for a zoning read as far
Katie,
as.
you want to come to the table, please?
People sometimes ask me about minimum parking requirements, and I just want to know what to tell them.
Sorry, I'm not seeing that up here.
Yeah, it was a few
What we're
slides.
referring to.
The question had to do for when parking is required for multi-tenant buildings more than 25,000 square feet. How is a tenant space defined? Robbie, certainly feel free to clarify that, but that was my understanding of the question of what would constitute a multi-tenant building to make that 25,000 square foot.
Thank you. Okay, thanks. Yeah, I just skimmed these slides, but I hadn't prepped these. Okay, it looks like in the TSS district, that's the traditional shopping street, which is kind of your more urban, smaller scale, commercial or mixed-use area is the only area that there is a reference to a multi-tenant building, and I would say that is about, well, it says mixed use or multi-tenant building, actually, in the zoning code. It's either that 10,000, I'm sorry, I'm looking at the slide. It's either building uses or additions exceeding 10,000 square feet floor area for an individual establishment. There is a minimum in that particular zoning district. Or if there's 25,000 square feet in floor area for either a mixed-use building or a multi-tenant building. So I would say that's going to have either be mixed-use residential with a mix of non-residential or multi-non-residential tenants.
Okay.
Not just an apartment building.
That was my
Not
question.
solely residential, yes.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Robbie, and thanks, Katie. Okay, go ahead.
Was there another question?
Oh, okay, go ahead.
For the terminology, because it doesn't stick. I see the slide is gone, but there was something on the slide about the last item on the slide, restaurant taverns within 300 feet of another restaurant tavern, which through that process, I learned of NGO 28.141 that talks about, I'm trying to figure out that word, the purview that you have to reduce, I think the word is reduction, to reduce the number of stalls by default. Can you speak about that and how is that determination made?
Sure, yeah, so and it's not just restaurant, taverns, it's...
For everybody.
To be clear on the record, it's restaurant, tavern, or brew pub. So those four uses, which all sound the same, but are all actually a little bit different, they all do have minimums in some zoning districts. The zoning code does allow some flexibility with not meeting the minimum, and let me get to that part of the code. The parking section's quite long. So there's kind of different levels of approval depending on the extent of the ask for a reduction in the minimum required, if there is a requirement. So for non-residential uses, the applicant may reduce the parking requirement by the greater of 5 parking spaces or 10% of the required parking, and they can just do that. There's not an additional approval required for that for non-residential. You can have a further reduction of up to 20 car parking spaces. Those can be approved by the zoning administrator. So me and my staff team, we have a form that's filled out with particular information as laid out in the zoning code, the considerations we have to make for those approvals. But at that level, it's a staff level administrative approval. The third level is a reduction of more than 20 spaces. again, car parking spaces, but less than 25% of the required parking. Those may be approved by the director of the department, so DPCED. Generally, that duty has been delegated to the planning director, so Bill would be doing that now as the interim planning director. And then the fourth level, if they're asking for a reduction of more than 20 spaces and 25% or more of the required parking spaces, that's a conditional use approval. So you would see that here on the Plan Commission.
And does that apply really to everybody, not just restaurants, taverns, whatever? Those rules, they're...
Yeah, anytime there would be a minimum required, they could apply for that reduction.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions before we go ahead? Yes, Pat.
Actually, most of my questions were just answered, but I did want to just clarify. Katie, I heard you say that the minimum parking requirements are only in TSS?
No, it's just that multi-tenant buildings larger than 25 square feet in area, and there's one other part to that. That is only the TSS district. The other ones, the single building tenant, there's a whole list, 10,000 square feet. This is not the exact code language, right? So that applies in some other zoning districts as well. And then the TSS district also has something about the it's really that multi-tenant buildings of 25,000 square feet in area or more, as well as mixed-use buildings that meet that in the TSS district. So that second one only applies in that zoning district.
So those first two bullets override all of that. Downtown single-user building could be 100,000 square feet and have no minimum. Right?
Yes, so the downtown area has no minimum regardless. Same with the TOD overlay district. Yeah.
Okay, and
then also the CC district is another one that doesn't have a minimum. There's a number of employment districts that have no minimum.
okay, and I'm just making sure I'm thinking about the parking stuff clearly. I initially started thinking, oh, well, TE should be involved in this, but this is all off-street parking. So TE has no input on waiving parking or reducing parking requirements.
Not the numbers. I know that they look a lot at the design. I don't know, Sean, you want to?
Yeah, we look at 10.08, so the parking dimensions and operations of the parking facility, but the quantity is not something we look at. That's set by zoning.
So you're looking at flow within a private parking lot and structure.
Yeah, and even if there is multi-tenants, that's something I failed to mention. We will look to have, make sure they have like signage for what tenants have which stalls. That's one thing that we look for too. Yeah, so it's more the operation of the parking lot rather than the quantity of stalls. So driveways, number of driveways as well. We look at that. We permit driveways or don't permit driveways. But
triangle, all that stuff.
A lot more safety based, I guess I would say. We kind of like bounce back each other on
yes,
that way.
All right, thank you.
Okay, go ahead.
I think that turn over to Trent at this point.
Okay.
So I'll start by pointing everyone to the graphic on the screen. So with the curb, what is included in that is the curbside lane, which could be on-street parking. It could be a bike lane, a bus lane, or a loading zone. And then going on to the terrace area and then the sidewalk zone. So that is all of what we'd be considering within the curb and really the focal point of any sort of curb management plan. So curb management is something that cities around the country are starting to consider and develop plans and policies to take a look at how to better accommodate all transportation modes in their curb space and really seek to make the space dynamic, flexible, and respond to different demands. Within the last 15 years, I mean, we've had so many new modes introduced here in Madison and, in other places, thinking about ride shares such as Uber and Lyft or our B-Cycle program. 10, 15 years ago, those were either just starting or not even here. So, the curb management effort can really be a way that we can proactively look at what sort of infrastructure improvements we're making and how to best accommodate new modes and modes that we're investing in here in the city. And so, next slide, Kevin. We've looked preliminarily at quite a few different cities who have implemented curb management plans, and on the screen is a snippet from San Francisco, who did a curb management plan, and the figures there are a little hard to see, but through their data collection as part of their effort, they found that over 90% of all curb space was dedicated to storage for vehicles, and with the huge amount of infrastructure investment that they're placing into public transportation and other, more sustainable transportation amenities, they really want to proactively try to change the percentages to accommodate more access to people, whether that's transit boardings or shared mobility, so bike share, or access for goods, so that includes like short-term delivery spaces, and then also public space, and then considering movement of cars, buses, and bicycles.
So Trent, the arrows going this way, what are those?
Yeah, so that's movement. So 4% of their curb space is allocated to like general travel lanes or bike lanes. And then the 2%, that's public spaces and service. And then to the right of that, that's the access to goods, so the loading spaces. And then 1% is access for people.
Okay, thank you.
So looking at all the different cities that have adopted curb management plans, there seem to be some consistent themes across the board on what sort of problems they're seeking to address. And really at the top was street parking, and especially when it's free and abundant, that really, based on data, encourages more single occupancy vehicle trips. And as you can see in this picture, it also can encourage really a mismatch between where cities are putting their investments in bike infrastructure and bus lanes that are occupied by delivery vehicles. And then related to that is some safety concerns. So if there's someone walking here or biking, they obviously can't use that piece of infrastructure and are put at risk of getting into the street where there's an oncoming car. So it is really an issue that cities are trying to proactively try to look at to find solutions that not only accommodate for the infrastructure itself and the users, but also look proactively to see whether there's a space available for delivery drivers to have a predictable spot that's not in a bike lane or a bus lane.
So how do we currently try to enforce the prohibition against stopping in bike lanes and bus lanes and all of that?
It is a challenge for enforcement officers because generally by the time they get there, after the complaint comes in, the vehicle's usually gone. In trying to find alternate locations that are nearby for these deliveries to happen. So this is kind of where we are looking at where can loading zones go, because if we've removed all the loading zones to create the bike infrastructure, now we don't have a spot for these deliveries to happen. So we're looking at, as we're working on the curb management plan, we still need to do something now to fix the problem temporarily. Enforcement officers do their best to either move the vehicle along, issue a citation. A lot of times with the companies, the citation goes to the company. The driver doesn't pay for it, so they'll generally just take the ticket. So it doesn't really deter them from using those spaces.
So is it parking people who
Parking
do the
enforcement officers,
enforcement?
yes. Yeah.
Okay, and they would enforce then double parking too, so blocking a traffic lane?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Go ahead.
Stephanie, do the police ever do enforcement if they're there? If they see it?
Generally, no. They might call in for a parking enforcement officer to come over. I suppose if it's a big enough safety issue, they might pull over, but usually they don't handle parking issues.
Okay, thank you.
I'll just mention too, as an aside, other cities are looking at smart technology to have automated enforcement of some double parking areas. So, that's not necessarily something that we might be able to do if there's any level of state preemption, but it is something that, we would potentially look into and see if it would be a good fit for Madison.
Okay, cool.
Sorry, Trent, is that prohibited now, just like speed cameras are?
Yeah, I'm guessing.
We do mail out tickets. We have some camera technology right now to enforce. So if you've seen our vehicles with the cameras on them, we use those for 2-hour enforcement, residential permit enforcement. There's a lot of new technology out there that some of it is connected directly to UPS, FedEx, to their GPS systems. So anytime the vehicle pulls over, if it pulls over into a metered space or a no parking zone, they're charged for it at that time. So the system knows the vehicle's there. So there's so many different ways to do it, which I'm pretty excited about, having done the enforcement piece of it. I think there's definitely not just like the mailing out with a camera system, but there's other ways that you can do it where you can connect directly with those vendors and see where their vehicles are at all times. And they have like an account set up basically where every time they're cited, we just send a bill. They'd send the bill at the end of the month, so. But it doesn't stop them from doing it. So that's like, it charges them, but it doesn't stop them from doing it.
I just guess a quick question to follow up on that. Are you aware of any best practices to try to help prevent these things from happening in the first place?
We have found that if we can communicate with those companies on a local level, so like the Uber, Lyft, the post office, some of those companies on the local level, and just have that conversation with them and say, this is creating a really hazardous problem for us, and just explain to them, here's where some loading zones are nearby. Could you please ask your drivers to use these? We've received pretty good response, but then you get turnover with the drivers and then you have to start all over again. So I think right now, it's just trying to get enforcement officers everywhere they need to be to help just tell the person they can't be there. But once we can start creating additional loading zones and, we create the loading zones, but then the drivers don't know where those loading zones are located. So finding a way to communicate that to them where they can easily access it and figure out, like, on their route, this is where I need to go for each drop-off.
You can go to the next slide, Kevin. So as part of our very early stage consideration for curb management, we're really trying to take a look at how recent policy efforts and things like bus rapid transit implementation can tie into curb management and really build on some of the recommendations from the comprehensive plan, Vision Zero, and Complete Streets. As you can see in the slide here, there's a modal hierarchy from the Complete Streets Guide, which really puts its focus on having space allocated directly to bike, transit, and pedestrian infrastructure. And lower on that hierarchy are parking, loading, and Uber and Lyft. So, we really want to, as part of curb management, try to find a way to, bring all of those efforts together to get the most out of recent investments that we've made in bike lanes, in, bus-only lanes, and other infrastructure, and really consider future investments and really making sure that the curb management considerations are put to the forefront. This is another snippet from the San Francisco plan, and kind of shows a way that they're sort of trying to prioritize different curb uses in a way that prioritizes different modes based on land use and the context. So whether it's a low-density area in San Francisco, or if it's on Market Street right downtown, at the forefront, they're trying to prioritize movement as opposed to, that 90% of all their curb space that's currently used for parking, and really push access to, transit or biking or walking higher than it is currently, and then also consider, where loading is important and where access to public space is important. So for us, we're at the very early stages, but we're really trying to get a sort of roadmap of what the curb management policy would look like. So we sort of want to start by establishing a framework which would help to set high-level goals, and then sort of build on Complete Green Streets, Vision Zero, some of those other plans and policies, leverage national best practices, so looking at San Francisco or Seattle or some of those other cities that were mentioned, and then really provide guidance on how to optimize curbside uses. And then after establishing the framework, we would develop an action plan which would apply the framework's guidance to specific areas of Madison, and then it could lead to some potential ordinance amendments, and then we could consider some pilot programs, and then also some long-term changes to different blocks throughout the city.
Who's being included in this development discussion? I know it's early, but who is participating in this important endeavor?
Sure. So the initial group, as of right now, because we're very early in it, is just DOT, so transportation, traffic engineering, parking, planning's involved. I think those are the key players right now, and then we will do a lot of community engagement with this. We're planning to look at getting a consultant to help us through the process. We recently applied for a DOT grant to help fund with the consultant and doing a lot of data collection. It's very hard. We need someone that can collect that data instead of having us manually go out and try to collect it.
Okay, thank you.
So we're obviously very early on in the curb management process, but we sort of started internal conversations about what some of our goals could be. And a very popular one was trying to update our RP3 program, and then also just in general to optimize street parking. So, it's supporting businesses and not necessarily long-term storage of vehicles. And it's not a situation where people are having to drive blocks on end to try to find parking. We want to make sure that people can find parking, but in a way that also encourages using other modes. And tying into that to really protect some of our recent investments in transit, over hundreds of millions of dollars into the east-west bus rapid transit, and then some of the protected bike lanes that we've seen throughout the city, and then really consider some of those emerging uses of the curb, such as Uber and Lyft, and we really want to foster better collaboration between the city agencies that could be involved in this. With just so many different interests, I think it's important that we stick to the plans and policies that we have adopted and really connect well with other city agencies.
I would point out that we are hearing more and more from residents of the city about the concern that we are not prioritizing trees and having terraces that are wide enough for trees. And I don't see that mentioned here, so I would urge you to think about that in the mix too.
Yeah, I mean, it's,
And if I can interrupt, sorry, I just wanted to, I don't really know how to phrase this, but I could see where a lot of what I'll call equity concerns could come into this discussion as it moves along, and I just wanted to make sure that early in the process, those are being considered, especially economic equity, and who's going to provide those voices in your discussions. Thanks.
Yeah, go ahead.
On the same subject that you were talking about with street trees, I was on a neighborhood call, doesn't really matter what the development was, it was not in downtown, but apparently several mature trees were going to be lost from the city right-of-way for the redevelopment of a building because the fire department didn't want mature trees in front of the building. So I'm just going to throw that in there as something that we might need to work on, because I was rather concerned that they just, during the initial neighborhood discussion, just sort of brushed off the loss of city trees in the terrace on a busy road because the fire department was worried about access to the building. So I'll just leave that there. So.
Okay, thank you. Yes, John.
Just another thing to keep in consideration. At the Board of Public Works last night, we reviewed for approval the new policy for large item pickup and related ordinance change. And if approved, one of the significant impacts will be that multifamily buildings that already are required to use private sources for trash pickup will now, for the first time, officially also become responsible for large item pickup. Whereas before, they may have had tenants who just schlepped their mattress or whatever out to the curb. Now it's going to be an obligation of the landlord. And it occurred to us that that might be something to be considered in conditional use management plans and so forth, for amount of space to be made available for private trash pickup or something like that.
Thank you. Other questions or comments before we move on? Okay, go ahead.
So as far as the timing of our efforts are concerned, we're expecting this to be about a 2-year process. So we're going to get going on establishing the framework later this year, and then on to 2025, turn that into the action plan. And as Stephanie mentioned, we did apply for a pretty large grant that would help us, potentially hire a consultant. And what we've seen with other curb management plans is that, the majority of them did have outside consultant help. And we think with some of that expertise that, some consultants might have, would really help to, leverage their expertise and gather a lot of that data that would be a little cumbersome for staff, and then also really have a robust public engagement process as part of this. So we know, hearing from the community what, curb uses we should be prioritizing.
Okay, so I think I'm looking at the clock here. We just had some framing questions, but before we get to that, these were just in case the Plan Commission needed some ideas of things to ask about, but I'll leave it open to the Plan Commission if they have questions for any of the transportation or parking or zoning staff or planning staff.
So any questions? Yes, Chris.
Thanks. So I know a few years back when there was talk of just tweaking RP3, there was, it might have been preemption issues or something else. And so it might have just required a rewrite of the ordinance, but there might have been some state law that was getting in the way. Have you started digging into that?
We have not. I know what you're talking, yes, I remember that. There's certain language in the state statute that we have to follow. We can try to get creative with our ordinances, but we are kind of restricted in how much we can change the RP3 program. We haven't started digging back into that again, but I do know our RP3 program is different from other states, which I found interesting. And so we're going to look at, are there better ways we can do it that provide a better experience for the permit holder, because it is spending a lot of time driving around looking for a spot. So we will dive back into that, but yeah, we are limited by state law and what we can do.
And we currently oversell in a lot of areas by 25%? Yeah, okay. Other questions? Yeah, Patrick.
I guess, I'm very interested in this. I was involved in those discussions a few years ago too with Chris and others, and it's very complex, but I guess my question is this pertinent to Plan Commission? Even though I find it infinitely fascinating.
The link that I would see here is, as was pointed out, we don't have requirements for loading for.
Part of it, yeah.
Yeah, right.
I got
other than
in that.
Other than I find it very interesting too, but I don't think so. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wondering.
Yeah.
Loading, definitely, yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, so, okay, go ahead.
So once you go through this process, how do you communicate with other committees? Because like Patrick just said, may not be relevant to it, but I've been on committees where it's not relevant to it, and there's excessive amount of discussion talking about parking where it's not even in their purview. So how do we educate people on the changes that will transpire or have transpired when it comes to these topics, specifically on committees?
Yeah, this will definitely go to Transportation Commission. I suppose as we move along with developing the policy, we will probably identify different committees or commissions that we want to have review it, whether it's parking related, traffic related, if engineering has a piece in this as well for the curb space and development. So we can just work that into our plan on, as we're developing the policy.
I would recommend to really expand that scope to things that perhaps like parks, for example. We had conversations about parking in parks, and it seems like it's such a distant topic, and I keep on saying this impacts everybody. We need to really get more real about it. But things like that, or the ARC, for example, that perhaps is not on the scope, but people talk about parking there all the time. So it would be nice to be able to incorporate those committees so they understand what the rules are. And it really creates a lot of confusion to the public and a lot of unnecessary anger over things that some people don't really understand. So thank you.
So just a time check. We've got about 10 more minutes on this item. And I would like to focus on the first two questions, framing questions for discussion. Management plans for loading and trash are commonly listed as approval conditions and worked out with various city staff after approval. Is additional information desired to be included in the initial materials reviewed by Plan Commission? Yes, go ahead.
This might be a more appropriate question for the planning staff, but I am curious how staff assess the information that are on the management plans for quality, and whether or not any of that might come back to plan for further review, because I know we've had these questions in some of our meetings looking for more detail before we would give conditional approval, and I just wonder how that comes back to plan if needed.
So do you have anything, Kevin, that you want to?
If it comes back to the Plan Commission, is that what you're asking?
Yeah, I guess I'm just wondering how staff kind of assess these things for reasonableness and whether or not where's the line for more detailedly required, and whether or not something might need to come back to Plan Commission for final review?
Yeah, I mean, the management plan is relatively new. I haven't seen, and maybe Kevin, I don't know if there are discussions I'm not aware of where we've said this isn't sufficient and the applicants push back and then we've said, no, well then you have to go back to Plan Commission. You know, usually they want these things to be solved too. We only know so much, some of it, how it will work ahead of time. I know, you know, the landlords, the property owners, they don't want there to be these issues on their property either. So a lot of it is like just getting them to think about these things and making sure they've considered them up front. I don't know, Kevin, if you have other thoughts. I mean, generally, we haven't had problems with them meeting at least what we think is
a couple of thoughts. I mean, I would agree. I think the best condition is a specific condition that if something coming out of the Plan Commission and maybe the overarching condition is you fill out the management plan, but I think if the Plan Commission would specify what the issue and maybe the desired outcome, I think that makes for a best condition, maybe less ambiguity at the sign-off phase when staff is dealing with it. I would say that when staff, at least in my experience, is if there's a question that the management plan has a parking-related or loading-related component, especially if it would touch the right-of-way, you know, we'd try to specify that the management plan is approved by staff and specify the different departments that would have the expertise to review that. So we would try to bring, you know, those colleagues along. So I would say, you know, specificity is definitely important. And I think, you know, when it's, the point would be this is something that's addressing a potential issue or impact at the Plan Commission. So it'd be, you know, good to, when you're kind of focusing those comments and at making motions and so forth, to specify those issues.
I would comment, I've been on Plan Commission now for quite a few years, and it does seem like we used to get more information about loading and trash and loading movements and, you know, that kind of thing at the Plan Commission than it seems like we're getting now. I'm not saying necessarily that was lots better, but it did in some cases, I think, provide a little bit more context for some of the discussion. So, anything else on that item? Given the increasingly frequent and significant issues with double-parked vehicles blocking bike lanes and bus lanes and travel lanes, and I would say in crosswalks, should requirements for convenient delivery spaces in apartments, condos, et cetera, be explored and possibly addressed? Yes, Patrick.
I guess my thought, and I think I've expressed this at Plan Commission, is that, and this maybe references some of what we heard earlier, you can build all the parking spaces you want for, you know, delivery services, and they just are always, either they don't know they're there, or they're going to take the quickest path that they can possibly find without regard to anything else. That doesn't mean you shouldn't require them, but I do think that this problem won't go away even if we do require them.
Yeah, they do seem to pick the most convenient place, which is right in front of whatever door they're delivering to, whether it's bike lane or a bus lane or cars are already parked there or whatever. Yeah, it's an issue.
If I may, I'm thinking of something we approved on Monday that had a loading spot. Maybe it's the one on Brook Street, like off Conklin Place or something. They're never going to use that. They're going to park on Johnson or Brooks. And maybe signage might help, but I don't have a lot of faith in that.
Maybe a period of enforcement.
Maybe electric shock or something. I don't know.
I knew you'd come up with a good answer. Any other? Yes, Chris.
Well, I guess to that point, are there any examples of on-site loading areas that are working very well? Because that might be a model to keep in mind if there were, but.
I'd say when we've done pull-ins with a pull-out, a U driveway thing, there's not a lot of room. Maybe it can be under the building, but where there's an entrance and an exit that's well defined, I'd say those have worked. I can't think of
Well,
one.
I mean, Constellation and Galaxy, don't they? They've got like a back alley there, and
They have easily accessible parking garages
yeah,
in the middle
right.
or underneath, yeah.
It doesn't work. We actually had to add in, it was during the pandemic, we had to add in curbside drop-off loading zones because there was so many deliveries happening on the street. So they weren't using the off-street, they were still using the on-street.
They were still using that.
But yes, like the Lorraine and, is it Kennedy Manor are the two
Kennedy
that have
Manor,
those
yeah.
cutouts. I know the city isn't, I know they don't like doing those, from what I understand.
Because of two curb cuts, you mean?
Where they have the horseshoe.
Is it because of having two curb cuts that the city is?
Well, I don't know. I just know that it's not something they usually look at.
Yeah, pedestrians then have to cross, vehicle areas, right? So like our TOD overlay would not allow what would be part of auto infrastructure between the building and the street. So obviously there's trade-offs.
Yeah, there are, yeah.
Yeah, so I'm just trying to think of anywhere where it works well. I suppose down here in Wilson, the condos across the street, they have a drive-in where there's a loading zone. We do see people use that one. So, but there's no parking on the street over there right now, so that could be why.
Yeah, but that doesn't often doesn't stop people anyway from, okay. Well, thank you very much for being here and sharing that information. And we look forward to you curing this problem. Okay, so moving on. Agenda item 3, Legistar 84294, overview and discussion regarding the conditional use process and approval conditions. And again, this is on here because of several people expressing some confusion, and I'm one of them, over what conditions that are listed in the pages of conditions that we have, that the Plan Commission really has any kind of purview or authority over. And one of the things that I mentioned was just dividing them up. So, it shows the ones that Plan Commission actually can touch and change or whatever, and the things that maybe we can't. I do think that it's valuable to see all the conditions that, and sometimes they're called requirements and sometimes they're called comments, and so I'd like to have clarity on that too. But I think it's helpful. Thank you, Robbie, for coming and being here. To have that context, that broader context, but I think some clarity on those things that the Plan Commission does have authority over. So, and several people in individual conversations that I had with Plan Commissioners also brought this up as an issue. So that's where this came from. And with that, oh yes, we do have Alex. Want to come up and speak again?
Thanks, Madam Chair. The explanation you just gave was really helpful. I did not get that from looking at this document. I'm reading this document and I'm going, what's the problem they're trying to solve? And just saying, Plan Commission does not understand which of the conditions that staff recommends they have input on or not. And that should be on the first page. Here's the problem that we have, and we want to clarify. The goal is to clarify which ones you have input on. That said, I'm going to take this time, and I just want to share some other ideas for improvement. And hopefully you reach out and to the community and stakeholders and say, what else can we do to make, the zoning code better and make improvements to the process? And I've got a list of a number. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to get up through all of them, but I'm sort of in order of importance. One, significantly reduce the uses allowed with a conditional use permit. Madison is very unusual in the depth and breadth and nature conditional uses. It's very unique there. It will speed up the process, allow more projects to be approved by right, and reduce your workload. To require applicants to provide substantial evidence in their application that all the standards are met. For example, provide them with a table of the requirements or standards, and they've got to fill that out with their application. Improve the due process. For example, when the staff report comes out, how to rebut testimony and comments, things like that. 3, reduce the prejudice and bias in the process. The financial viability of the project is not relevant to the standards, for example, or the fact that there's a housing crisis is not relevant to the standards. It's a quasi-judicial process. You should read the comments.
You do have 30 seconds.
Thank you so much. We need to do a better job educating the public on what they should include in the comments, not what they think or want or like, but what are the standards and is the project compliant with the standards? And a lot more education could be done on that would save a lot of angst and a lot of time for you. Make it easy to integrate all the relevant standards into the staff report.
Thank you, Alex. Okay, I think we're going to hear first
Yes,
from Kevin.
I will lead this. I will lead this. Oop, there goes my chair.
Yeah, don't sit.
So, hold on, let me just, bear with me here. Let me just get the presentation back. Okay. So yeah, I'm going to lead this discussion here, and just like last time, I'm hoping that this is just a discussion, so feel free to, ask questions, interject as we go through, and then we'll have some time at the end, hopefully, to go through it. So, again, looking through this, a couple of different purposes here, and I think first we're going to do a pretty high-level overview of the conditional use process. I think some members have been on the Plan Commission for a long time, others are a little bit newer, and we've got other people in the public listening. So do kind of a very high-level overview of what is a conditional use. And then we're going to talk about the conditions. And we say conditions here, these are items and comments, recommendations, actually requirements that the Plan Commission puts on a particular conditional use. And there are some important limits that we want to stress here in terms of what types of conditions the Plan Commission could provide to a conditional use. So we'll do a high-level overview with that. And I will note that Assistant City Attorney Kate Smith is here if we have questions on that, or if I need any clarification. Certainly, Kate, feel free.
Why don't you come up?
And then I think, and then the final part, as the chair had mentioned, was we want to talk about how these conditions are presented in the staff report. And they've evolved over the years. I've been staffing the Plan Commission for many years, and kind of in my time here, they've evolved, and they were something different before that. So just kind of talk about how they've evolved, and maybe more importantly, talk about in the future how is this clearly communicated? One, for this body, and then for the public, too. What is clearer and how to do it? So we can just talk about that. So really very interested in the commission's feedback. So again, we've got some framing discussions that we can get to at the end, but also it's most important to hear from the commission here and get your feedback. So again, I just want to talk generally, a conditional use, it makes up a majority of the projects that the Plan Commission sees. And it was mentioned earlier, the Plan Commission is what's called a quasi-judicial body. You're the approving body on conditional uses, and you need to make findings based on a series of standards. I'll go a little bit more about that, but just want to talk about, highlight the amount of work that the Plan Commission does on conditional uses. And if you look at this table here, and I've just highlighted, this is a table that's from our annual report, and the highlighted line talks about the volume of conditional uses that the Plan Commission sees. And so, it's anywhere, 70 to, over 100 conditional uses we see on an average year. Generally, the Plan Commission is seeing, close to 200 different applications a year. So a very high percentage of these are conditional use or potentially conditional use alterations. So here's some language from the zoning code, and I won't read through this, but in generally what the zoning code talks about the conditional use, uses are divided essentially, an allowed use is one of two things. It can be a permitted use. That's a use that's allowed by right, that so long as you meet all the technical requirements, one is able to pull a permit. That's a permitted use that doesn't have a discretionary review. The Plan Commission wouldn't be able to approve or not approve a permitted use. The other bucket is the conditional use. And again, as the Plan Commission being a quasi-judicial body, you are the approving body on a conditional use. A conditional use itself is a use that could be allowed after consideration by the Plan Commission in a public hearing. And what the Plan Commission needs to do is make findings based on the approval standards. And it's the 16 that are in the zoning code that we can speak to if there's specific questions. But that's what the Plan Commission needs to make its findings on. And again, I would boil it down to largely a conditional use has to do with impacts. That's really what you're looking at is evaluating for impacts. Now, there's a lot of different nuances to that, so it's kind of a very big picture summary, but largely most of those standards have to do with impacts on a project. And I should also note, and it's clear when you look at the standards, hopefully, not every conditional use standard applies to every conditional use request. Sometimes there's some specialized items. As was noted earlier, our code has quite a few conditional uses, and they're quite varied in terms of what they are. So there's a large variety of items come under the conditional use envelope. So, but again, findings, and each site is unique. So just talk a little bit more about the process here in these slides. A Plan Commission will hold a public hearing, and the Plan Commission then would grant or deny the request. And I note this in here, but I do think the Plan Commission does a good job of making clear findings on a request in terms of if it was to find a standard is or is not met, specifying that and the reasons why is very critical for the record and the findings that the Plan Commission makes. But again, Plan Commission, and we'll talk about this in a couple slides here, but the Plan Commission has the ability to place conditions on its approval. The decision of the Plan Commission is appealable to the Common Council. So while you're the deciding body, appeals of your decisions could go to the Common Council if filed in accordance with the zoning code. And one more point here, continuing jurisdiction. That is the zoning code term, but essentially you could refer to this as ongoing review of a conditional use. And this right allows the Plan Commission to review certain complaints against a conditional use. And it's I can go into more details if there's questions. We haven't had a continuing jurisdiction case in quite some time at the Plan Commission. But essentially there's a two-step process. There's an initial hearing, and if the Plan Commission after that hearing believes it's likely that the conditional use standards could be violated, then a formal hearing and action would be taken in which the Plan Commission could take a variety of actions on a conditional use to address the complaints. Could be adding or revising conditions or potentially revoking the conditional use itself. So if there's questions on that, we can come back to that, but that's the continuing jurisdiction, and that applies only to conditional uses. So I have this slide in here, and I think this is just a a key thing that I want to stress. Now, again, talked earlier that the Plan Commission sees many, many conditional uses, and it's a large percentage of what you do. It's not all that you do. You see rezoning requests, and you see demolitions and other things. But I do want to kind of highlight especially some of the differences between conditional uses and rezonings, because I think these are some critical changes in terms of considerations between the two that are different. So, and I'll go through this relatively quickly. Please stop me if there's any questions or clarifications I can provide to anybody. But a conditional use is really, it's tied to a specific project or a specific aspect of a project. It's site-specific, it's development-specific. A rezoning, if you think about it, a rezoning action is really changing the designation on the zoning map. I mean, really broadly speaking, you're changing the color on the map from yellow to orange. It's not necessarily tied to a project. Once a zoning change is made, it's not tied to a project that the Plan Commission's seen. You could do any of the developments that are then available in the revised zoning district. However, a conditional use is based on the plans that the Plan Commission approved. A conditional use approval is valid for 3 years, while a zoning change is an action of the Common Council and does not change. It would take another action of the City Council to change the zoning district back or to another district. The standards are a little bit different. For a rezoning, the state law, it's the consistency requirement as we sometimes refer to it, but essentially in part that a rezoning shall be found consistent with the adopted comprehensive plan. For the bar is a little bit different for conditional use, and a conditional use is not covered by the state's consistency requirement, but city ordinance says that you shall provide due consideration of adopted plans when making findings on a conditional use and the related standards. Again, the conditional use standards, we've mentioned the 16 standards that apply, and the rezoning standards are a little bit broader, largely based on health, safety, and welfare.
Somewhat hypothetical question perhaps, but we often see rezonings and conditional uses at the same time as part of a project proposal. If a project did not end up going, we approved the rezoning and the conditional use, and the project did not end up going forward and meeting all of the approval conditions, getting the building permit, would the rezoning still go into place or no?
Yes, the rezoning, in that case, the rezoning would still, the new zoning would be the zoning for the property. The conditional use would expire after 3 years, but the new zoning would be in place. And then again, kind of talking about conditions of approval. When you think of a rezoning, again, the action of a rezoning is really changing the designation on the zoning map. And so the way the ordinances, we don't typically, unless it's a plan development, which we can talk about, but for a conventional zoning change, the Plan Commission can't establish conditions on the development itself. But with a conditional use, because it's project specific, the Plan Commission could establish conditions of approval. So this is a slide here. I just want to talk a little bit about the conditions here and some of the limitations. I think there, even at the staff level and the commission level, there could be things that we think this could really make the project better. But we can't always tie that to a project. We have limitations depending on the nature of the ask. So just a couple of points, we might have multiple conditional uses. It's not atypical to have 2, 3, even more conditional uses. I can't think off the top of my head what the record number of conditional uses for a project is, but I can think certainly of ones that had 5 or 6, maybe 7 conditional uses. So, but a condition must be directly related to the conditional request before the body. And I've got some Supreme Court cases here, from the 90s and 80s that are really key. So for anybody who went to planning school, this was part of the things that you probably studied a little bit in terms of the limitation. But essentially, there's the Dolan case and the Nolan case. I'm not going to go into deep detail here, but essentially what these say is when you're establishing a condition, there has to be a nexus. It has to be related to the conditional use before you, and the extent or exaction held in the condition must be roughly proportional to what the ask is. So these are some, this is case law, but talks about some of the limitations that when you're making a condition, it's got to relate and it's got to be addressing the impacts of the conditional use. If I was going to kind of boil it down to that, that's kind of what these are saying. And so even if something is a really good idea and it could make a building look better, or it could make, if it's not related to the conditional use that's before the commission, there may be some concern about the ability to implement such a condition. The other point, and this will sound familiar for those of you who enjoy our staff reports every 2 weeks, we talk about the substantial evidence language. And that is, I want to say new, it's relatively new within the last 5 or 6 years as far as the state clarified some of the findings of conditional uses, but it does say that when making a conditional use decision, it must be based on substantial evidence and not personal preference. And so again, it's very clearly when making findings that you talk about the evidence as it relates to those standards. So I'm going to pause there just for a second and just see if there's any just questions about kind of the process, the technical thing, and then we can talk a little bit, dive into a little bit more about how these communication or these comments are communicated. But are there any questions from anybody here, just process-wise or conditional uses in general?
Questions or comments? Yeah, go ahead.
I had a question just in terms of, is there a development, I'm sorry, I'm just trying to understand the difference between rezoning and the conditional use. Is there an instance where a new development could go up and not? Like, I guess I'm trying to figure out, is conditional use like a term that is like broadly any new development, or are there some new developments that like will just happen and no one ever has to approve on plan commission?
Yes, there are. If you think about developments, there's essentially 2 types of uses that are allowed. The conditional use is the one that would come before the Plan Commission. You'd need to make the findings. But there's a whole other group of uses that are permitted uses that would never come before this body. They would have to meet the technical requirements and that are in the zoning code and in other city ordinances. But yes, not every development is a conditional use, and not every development would come before this body.
So we got a comment letter that quoted a different case, and the court in this case said, based on the legislature's use of that term, meaning the substantial evidence and personal preference, use of that term in conjunction with the phrase other than, we believe it did not intend to prohibit the use of personal preference, speculation, or personal knowledge completely. It meant to curb the use of that information as the only support for the conditional use permit. Any comments on that? Or maybe Kate does?
I'll turn it to Case, but what was the name of the case?
The case is was versus the town of Ashford in Stop the Ongoing Mine permit.
I'll let Kate speak to it, but I do think that if it's a recent case or, it's something we probably would need to look into and get
2019, yeah.
So, Kate, are you familiar at all with that case?
I'm not. So I want to see 2 things. First of all, I just want to make sure that you, and I'm sorry, I don't know your, Anjali. So rezoning and conditional uses are really kind of 2 separate things. So a rezoning is an official change to the official map, right? So the official map, which is part of your responsibility and the responsibility of the council, divides the city into districts. Within each district, there are conditional uses, permitted uses, and then uses that aren't allowed whatsoever. So, with the rezoning, so a lot of times projects will come and they'll say, we have this piece of land, we want to make a mixed-use development. And the actual zoning district doesn't either allow it as a permitted or a conditional use. So the applicant will need to ask for an actual rezoning of the actual land that's there, changing the use categories. That doesn't always happen, but then if they need it, they can go through the process by which it does it. And then conditional uses are really separate. Conditional uses are saying that we This is a use that if you meet the conditions, you can already do on this land, and it's already established by the district that is in the official map. Does that make sense? Okay.
Kate, could you maybe, in the future soon, take a look at that case that's quoted here and just let us know what your thoughts are on that?
Sure. I will tell you that, so the idea about in, I don't know, 2015 or 2016, the Wisconsin Supreme Court case made a decision in a case that's called All Energy versus Trempealeau County, which really reinforced the discretionary authority of the municipalities over conditional uses. And like the basic understanding of that case is that All Energy said there are these, I think it was some kind of mining, that doesn't matter, but they were saying we can or agree to meet the 37 conditions that are listed by this municipality that have to be met in order to get a conditional use in this district. But a public comment said, we don't want this mine. So the Plan Commission, or it might have been the Zoning Board of Appeals in Trempealeau County, they're kind of interchangeable here in that case, denied the conditional use permit, even though the applicant either agreed to meet or did meet through its application all of the conditions, relying on public comment. The legislature then made a swift change in 2017 Act 67 that overturned the Trempealeau County's decision. So what the legislator did was they drastically, and it's clear in the legislative intent of Act 67, it drastically curbed the discretionary authority of municipalities over conditional uses. It put in what is in the substantial evidence. And there was some legislative history. Originally, the actual language in the statutes was going to explicitly said that substantial evidence was not to include public comment. You then see in the legislative history that that language was removed by the final adoption of the act. So we can interpret from that legislative history that public comment can be used as some evidence or maybe even substantial evidence if it's included with facts, figures, things that are not just pure speculation. But regardless of what, I don't know that case and I'm happy to look at it, but it is incredibly clear from the legislative history and this court cases that have since followed from that it is not intended that public comment may be used to provide some information that you have in front of you to make it, but that the legislature intended that if an applicant meets or agrees to meet the conditions that are in that the municipality has already decided for a conditional use, the presumption is on the approval of the conditional use. So I don't want, I want that to be like very clear. While there might be some other case laws that, and like I said, I'm happy to look into it, that kind of play around the edges of it, this state statute is quite clear.
Okay, thank you, Kate. Any other questions? Yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Typical conditional uses, conditions set out or requirements, the ones that aren't necessarily highlighted in the staff reports are often very routine and not subject. And among those might be, you've got to have, submit a traffic report, you have to have a traffic management plan, just a general management plan, a stormwater maintenance plan, and in many cases, there's just no controversy over that. And those will be reviewed later when final plans are submitted and staff experts in that particular area will evaluate them and so forth. Okay, but it's certainly possible, and we will certainly hear this next Tuesday, that there may be comments, resident comments and so forth that said that's not adequate, that work that's typically and in most cases accomplished after the fact and after the approval by Plan Commission and if necessary on appeal by Common Council, no, that's not adequate. All of that work has to be done in advance and commented on because perhaps it will show that the conditions are not really being met or the intent thereof. I'm not sure what status that has, but I'm sure it's going to be an area requiring some comment and analysis and discussion next Tuesday, but I think that's going to be repetitive, and perhaps it's happened in the past.
Yeah, I want to talk about any particular project that's not on the agenda this afternoon, but I think to the point of being that there are many conditions that talk about next steps and things that have to occur as a condition of approval. I think, though, I would note from a Plan Commission standpoint, if you believe if you're looking at those 16 standards that apply and you want more information, the Plan Commission could say we would like to review this data before we make our finding on that. Now, I think I do think that there are many comments that are routinely handled, Ms. Aljuger had mentioned, but there are instances that, and we'll talk about this as the comments are organized, if there are items that if the Plan Commission wants to refer an item to get additional information, that's typically something that the Plan Commission would be able to do.
Yes. Because I don't want to hold you back, but in this slide right here, when it says due consideration of adopted plans, sometimes we have cases where we have a 25-year-old plan from a neighborhood area, or we have cases where there's no neighborhood plan. So can you define due consideration there? I mean, am I good to assume due consideration means that you consider it, but doesn't mean that you agree with it?
Yeah, I don't know if there is a legal definition of due consideration, but as far as staff approaches that part of the plans, in every one of our staff reports, there's a section, and it could be a short paragraph, it could be a couple of pages, depending on the level of complexity, but we'll have a section that talks about how the proposal relates to adopted plans. So we would provide that analysis. Typically, we would start with the comprehensive plan because it covers the entire city, so that would be something that would be common to any site that we would be looking at for a development proposal in the city, and we would typically start with the underlying land use recommendation in that plan and then go from there in terms of other recommendations, and then talk to different layers of plans. Again, we've got neighborhood plans or neighborhood development plans, special area plans, and now we're moving into the area plans, and that would be another consideration that we would take into it. So I think a matter of, for a conditional use, I think for a zoning, you have to make the finding that it is consistent with the plan. And I think there was a follow-up, I think it came from case law that said consistent was defined as not being inconsistent. There's some language about defining what consistency is from that side. But for a due consideration standpoint, I think it's important to do that. But it's also important then to take that information and apply it to those 16 standards, and in terms of what's actually before the commission, because that's really what the decision needs to be based on.
Thank you. And then on the prior slide, you mentioned something about the continue power. I forgot the language. But
continuing jurisdiction.
Yeah, right. Thank you. So you said certain complaints, and there were certain kind of caught my attention. Is there a list of that? What those certain complaints are?
Well, yeah, that's a good clarification. It's a complaint, if it's filed, the Plan Commission is a two-step process. So the Plan Commission will have an initial hearing to see if the complaint, if it appears likely that there could be a violation of the conditional use. So it's a two-step process. Again, I can't think we haven't had one of these for quite some time, so I can't think of, we don't have a large number to speak to, but if it makes that first test, then the Plan Commission would be able to reconsider it. And if the Plan Commission holds the first public hearing and doesn't believe that there's a conditional use violation, that would be the end of that process, I believe, is how that works.
Thank you. And then on regards to Act 67, I did some digging, and the UW has a pamphlet in plain English, which is really good, and I can send it to you if you want to share. That explains the Act 67 law.
Katie, did you look like you were going to help me out there?
Just wanted to mention that.
It took me a second to be like, what was I going to say? obviously, there are a number of complaints, right? We would just deal with whatever ordinance can handle that complaint. So these are really an outlier situation where it's related to conditional use, and that seems to be the best way to address whatever complaint. But if it's, high weeds and grass, we're just going to do it as high weeds and grass. It's not going
You
to
want to
change
go to the
approach
existing
because it's a
ordinances.
conditional use, yeah.
Got it, yeah. But anyhow, thank you, that's all I got.
Okay, let's see. So I'm going to pivot to, I think, the next part of the presentation, and this is maybe a little bit less legal based. Oh, I think
Alder, do
Romani.
you want to come to the table?
I'm sorry, I just wanted to ask a question, real quick. Under what is a conditional use, when you're talking about clear findings, is there like a system that's used to make clear findings? I know it's something that we, the Landmarks Commission, are working hard to do. How to make a clear finding? What are the elements that are required under that?
I think it's a really good question. Maybe not one that I've got a short answer to, but I'll summarize what I think is a best practice, at least as it relates to the Plan Commission. I think a clear finding as it relates to conditional use is going to speak to if, let's just say, for example, Plan Commission didn't find standards were met. So they highlighted standard A, B, and C are not met. It's specified in their approval motion, or sorry, in their motion to deny. They specify the conditions and then really provide the reasoning and the background information why each of those standards is not met. And, really adding that information, making that part of the motion. I think that's really key. And I think there have been situations and meetings that I've staffed where I've asked commissioners to clarify or provide additional information to I guess, make sure that it's clear of what the basis was for that. I would say my experience with the Plan Commission has been, by and large, they're very good about making detailed findings related to that. But there's times where, I guess in my professional opinion, I'll ask the Plan Commission to, provide a little bit more information. Now, it's going to be different. I'm not as familiar with the, Landmarks Commission process and kind of the findings they make, but that's how I would advise the Plan Commission. And I don't know if, even any of the Plan Commissioners have any thoughts about that in terms of when you're making findings related to a condition.
Well, I do think that the staff report helps, with that because the various standards are addressed and at least the perspective of staff is reflected. And obviously we get more testimony and we bring different perspectives and viewpoints from each plan commissioner. So although in the vast majority of situations, the Plan Commission goes with what is recommended by staff or expressed by staff. In some cases, that is not done, and then there has to be a reason, even clearer in that situation as to, and I can think of a few where Plan Commission has varied from where staff was coming from. But yeah, to articulate. And I think that maybe Plan Commission has clearer standards that we look to than what Landmarks does, although I've not been on Landmarks, so I'm not sure about that. Okay. Any other questions? If not, let's go ahead and move on.
I just want to say one quick comment because I did find that case that you're referring to. It's an unpublished opinion, which is what in law we say doesn't have actually any precedential value. You have to have a published decision to establish case law.
Okay. Thanks, Kate. Yeah.
All right. Well, now I'm going to move into maybe more of how the conditions are communicated. And I want to start with going back in time a few years, just to kind of put a little how these comments have evolved. And, when I first started with the city and staff in the Plan Commission, comments were provided a series. You'd get a staff report from Plan Commission and then a series of individual memos from different departments, which would have, anywhere from one to multiple conditions. And so that was provided, and you essentially would receive, because every meeting was in person, every plan commissioner before the meeting would get essentially a kind of a ream of paper with all of these, with all the materials you get now, but it was all in paper. But the conditions were all individually provided by the agencies. And then about, I want to say 2010, it was actually part of a paper reduction initiative. And one of the things we did was we consolidated the comments in planning, took the comments from our colleagues in other agencies, and we put these into a report. And I think one of the comments that came from the Plan Commission, because we were testing it out, we had a couple of different, test versions of those reports. And we had a list of, and some reports have, let's say, a simple one might have 10, 15 comments, and another one might have close to 100. And I think the concern or the question was, well, what's important here? I mean, if we've got 100 comments, to Alder Gare's comment earlier, I mean, some of these are pretty standard operating procedure, but some of these are big deals. And so we came up with this great idea, the gray box that you see in all of your comments here. So essentially, the gray box, the intent of that years ago was really just to highlight this comment's a big deal. This is something that we want the Plan Commission to focus on. All of these are comments apply, but these are the ones that we think could be substantially change the project, or we want the applicant team to do that. I guess I should take a step back just a little bit further. We have comments and we have conditions in the report. And before my time at the city, there was a point where conditions, the Plan Commission report might have had truly the conditions, the things that are not city ordinance, the things that are not already requirements. These are things above and beyond necessary, the special recommendations that would come out of a body found necessary to meet the standards. But from the development community at that time, my understanding was that those approval letters got to be, so a team would get a short letter with 5 comments, but that was just the extra stuff and not all of the underlying ordinance requirements. So long as I've been here, and I think most of the staff that you see, every other Monday, the goal has been to put as many comments that we know, just for the sake of making it clear that, yes, there's comments that might come out of the Plan Commission, but there are these many other ordinance requirements.
So it's everything that's listed in the staff report and numbered. Are those all required conditions? I mean, can they all be called conditions and required?
I would say they're all required. I wouldn't say they're all conditions. Some are ordinance requirements. It's not a condition of the Plan Commission.
Oh, so you're distinguishing between an ordinance requirement versus a condition that's not necessarily in an ordinance.
Yep. That would be my take, because for example, I would say meeting stormwater regulations in Chapter 37 is not a condition of the approval of the Plan Commission, but it is something that has to be done, regardless of the Plan Commission said so or not.
And how are you using the word comment?
Well, I'd like to maybe, going forward, maybe from, 641 tonight and going forward, I guess I want to be clear that to me, I think a condition is something that's in addition to an ordinance requirement. That's something that, for example, something the Plan Commission would add to a project. I think they're all comments, but I think conditions are the things that are not otherwise required by ordinance or potentially statute or some other place. So to me, I think they're all comments, but I think conditions are those special things that the Plan Commission can alter and can amend.
So maybe what you're hearing a little bit is that part of maybe the confusion is that this serves a dual purpose, right? Some of it is, hey, Plan Commission, you need to know what's happening here. This is maybe something you need to consider as part of your conditional use approval. And on the other hand, it's, hey, developer, you need to make sure you do all these things because
and I do
you can't
think
get a building permit if you don't.
I do think it's a good idea for plan commissioners to see all of that. But I also would like both commissioners as well as the public to know what really Plan Commission has authority to do, or anyway, yeah, okay, good, that helped.
Question, do some of those some of what I was thinking were comments, come from, just flow out of the DAT meeting, and so they're not really even talked about after that, or are they separate from what comes out of the DAT meeting?
Okay, so now what is required is that you define what DAT stands for and what it is.
That stands for, oh, I used to know this.
Well, no cheating.
I will help out.
Design assistance team.
Close, very, very
Whole
close.
new.
The Development Assistance Team. And so just for the good of everybody in the room, the Development Assistance Team is a weekly meeting that's staffed by city agencies. It's sent out to all alders, and it's essentially a technical review meeting. Usually it's very early in the process where an initial concept is being vetted. Very rarely do we have very detailed engineered plans, but it's an opportunity to talk and learn what the technical requirements would be. To your initial question, the DAT review is usually, at a point in time. Usually the plans are not nearly as developed as what the Plan Commission sees. So it's a new review. Agencies are getting, when an application comes in, that is routed and that is reviewed. Now, I think agencies might go back, oh, I remember this from DAT and we talked about this, but the DAT comments, or the Development Assistance Team comments kind of are a point in time, and usually not. Every once in a while it might be more developed, but usually it's much less developed than what you see.
And when I was in Alder, I found those DAT meetings to be extremely informative and useful. So for what that's worth, yeah. Go ahead.
As to what you were saying about comments, so, and you said that, you had the ordinances and the conditions will go above the ordinances, and then you said, okay, so whatever you said. But I also want to make sure that I clearly understand that we can make comments and we can apply additional conditions, so we cannot go against a condition. Like, for example, condition 5, standard 5, I should say, it clearly states there that you can do X, Y, and Z, or imply that you were going to do it, and that's enough. We could the Plan Commission demand for them to have something completed before a project, even though the condition says the site improvements will be done or will be provided? Can an extra condition from the Plan Commission be applied to that condition? And change the or to yes, you have to have this information done before we approve the project.
Typically, yeah, if I understand, there's like a couple different kind of questions in there, so let me know if I don't quite answer all the different parts. But if it's specified coming out of the Plan Commission that this shall happen, the applicant shall revise the plans to do this, at the staff level, staff doesn't have the ability to say, that's not important. You have to do what's in that approval letter. Now, oftentimes those are phrased that for the approval, for staff approval or for the director approval or whatever it would be. But so long as it's established by the Plan Commission, it would be something that has to be met before permits are issued. And usually the conditions are phrased as such that it's prior to or during sign off and prior to permits. That's when these conditions would be met. So I think does that answer
The 5
part of it?
specifically is about transportation things, right? So, I mean, I can't see a scenario where we were saying, we can't approve the conditional use until you put the bike parking in first, right? Usually that's going to be part of the site plan.
Right, so you cannot go against the actual standard and demand that, because it's already saying that you have to get that done. Yes, you can create new conditions, but you cannot just go against the standard conditions and just change them to just add more requirements. It's just, I just wanted to verify that.
Okay.
Alderman.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to ask about DAT, because I'm a new alder, within the past, I've been here 1 year, and I kind of ran into DAT, which was cool. Are all developers required to go through DAT? Basically.
Yeah, it's not required. It's encouraged. It's highly encouraged, but we don't require it. I think most of large projects or projects of complexity, people will want to do that. But no, it's not required, but it is strongly encouraged.
You can stay up here, Alder.
Oh, yeah, I'm going to go do another Zoom, and then I'm coming right back. I'm trying to do 3 meetings at once, so I apologize. I will. Thank you, I appreciate it.
Any other questions?
It's very informative.
So in differentiating between those items that are listed that are conditions versus those that are requirements of the statutes. And so we understand that the Plan Commission doesn't have the authority to change those things that are required by statute. So what role then does the Plan Commission have in looking at the ability of the applicant to meet those things? Or is that really something that's just after the fact?
Well, I would say it's before permits that, for example, stormwater is the example.
Well, that's where I was going, but yes.
But just for example, a development would have to meet the requirements of that chapter, and that would be, city engineering would review for compliance with that standard. So, and that would typically happen after a plan commission when there's usually more detailed engineering drawings that come through is typically how that part of the process would be. But again, yeah, so the point would be there wouldn't be any comment that the Plan Commission could make to waive any of those requirements.
Or to change the substance of what's...
Right. The Plan Commission couldn't require, something different from the underlying ordinance requirement, I wouldn't think. There could be some exceptions to that, but I think generally as a rule, that would be something that, if there was those issues, hopefully someone from the agency would be able to kind of speak to that. If there was some more, I guess if there's a little bit broader consideration, but generally those other ordinance requirements aren't enforced by the Plan Commission and they wouldn't have the ability to change them.
Thank you.
Could we make sure in the future that all ordinance requirements that are listed reference the ordinance? Thanks.
And I will just say that are you looking for exactly where in the MGO? Because that is potentially a lot of additional work. There are a lot of comments.
Yeah,
and some of them come from policies and procedures manuals too. It's not all ordinances. I'm just not sure that's maybe the easiest thing for staff. It could potentially add a lot of additional work for maybe not a ton of value.
I guess I would offer let's explore how to do that, because I think at one point, one of the earlier versions there was, I'm just thinking of engineering comments had a citation, a primary citation, and that was when they were providing a checklist to the for example, I'm just thinking engineering's comments typically came in a checklist format, and they would check the boxes that applied to a particular project, and those had citations of the sections. I think that's something that I think we can explore, how we can clear it up, but I think we just have to see, how to get that information, in a way that, we can provide.
I mean, presumably the applicant would also want to have that information. So if that's going to be, a real burden, get back to us and let us know. But I would think that the applicant would also want to know the authority.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think a lot of the comments do reference.
I do. Yes, I agree.
If you look at the comments, I think a lot of the standard ones do already have references written into them.
Mm-hmm.
See a lot in the one I'm looking at.
And the one you're looking at, okay, well, but it's something that we can look at and see kind of options that we can do. So I guess I'll circle back here, and I know we're just about out of time, so I want to just be very quick here. Again, a gray box comment is right now highlighted to be something that is a big deal comment. In some cases, a gray box comment is truly a condition, one that the Plan Commission can change. And in other cases, it's an ordinance requirement that was flagged because you can't change it, but it would significantly impact a project. So there's a few examples in the staff report here, or in the presentation, that just talks a little bit about that. I'll just quickly walk through an example. There's one here. There's a gray box comment from I think this was probably an outdoor eating a report, and it was just that the door, or it was for some use, and it says the door must remain closed during business hours to prevent sound spillover. That wasn't an ordinance requirement, it wasn't in the zoning code, but found necessary to minimize impacts. So that was a major non-standard comment that the Plan Commission could have modified. On the next page, there's some zoning comments, and again, these are just code requirements. And then the bottom one.
So wait, before you go on, the number 2 there on the top of the page, it says hours of operation for the outdoor eating area shall end at 9 p.m. unless extended as part of a future conditional use approval. But yet you have this as something that cannot be waived by the Plan Commission. That seems contradictory.
That is actually
It's not what they applied for, though, right? So I think that's the thing, right? They would have to specifically be requesting that of Plan Commission.
Yeah, I would say that's a mistake in that note because there isn't a zoning, that's what they probably requested here. So that is a mistake as far as, I think if we go back to the underlying premise here that it's not an ordinance requirement, the Plan Commission could have altered that condition. It's highlighted incorrectly here.
Okay, thank you.
And the bottom one talks about there was some encroachments into city right-of-way, and by this approval, the Plan Commission doesn't have the ability to approve or not approve encroachments into the right-of-way. So it's highlighted as it's a big deal, but not one the Plan Commission can talk through. So, Chair, I'm going to turn it to you because I know we've got 5 minutes left on this item, and I want to make sure the last couple of slides just talk a little bit about kind of the sign-off process.
Okay.
And the stuff that happens after the Plan Commission.
Okay, good. I would like you to share that at the end or whatever so that Plan Commissioners will have the sign-off letter and information, and then maybe they could follow up with questions. But I would like to find out, are there questions? These are the framing questions, if you could go to that. Are there questions about the conditional use process or how the Plan Commission can establish conditions? I mean, we've had questions about the process. Do you have questions about how the Plan Commission can articulate and add conditions? Okay, I'm going to move on to the next one, but that doesn't close the door on any of these. So if down the road or tomorrow or next week or whatever.
I've got something actually on that first one.
Okay, go ahead.
And really, it's just because I've been on Plan Commission a while, it's kind of advice. There's nothing wrong with us. We do it all the time saying to staff, help us. We want to convey this thought in a condition of approval and just help us. And usually staff has experience, and sometimes you'll say, no, that's crazy, because oftentimes because of Nolan or Dolan or whoever that was. But
and actually, you can do that before the Plan Commission meeting by contacting staff and saying, I'm really concerned about this.
Yeah.
And then staff will have an opportunity to craft something before the meeting. So that's a good way to do it, too. And then, are there instances of conditions you thought would have improved a proposal, but were not be able to be added as conditions? And that might speak to whether our conditional use standards are in alignment with our values as a city. So I'm not saying that you can necessarily answer that right now, but I think it's an important question, really, to think about and consider. And if there is an issue, then it would be something that we would need to work with our alder members on, some kind of a change. So give that some thought too, please, because we want our decisions to be the best they can for everybody, for the city, for the developers, for the future. So think about that. Yeah, go ahead.
I think, and there's some conditions that we can't add because of state law, for example. And I do think that we could do a better job of articulating that, particularly when members of the public ask about like soundproofing, for example, on the north side. And I think we've all generally seen it enough that we know the limitations, but it would be good to speak to that more often so that the public realizes our limitation.
That's a very good point, yeah. Jeanette?
Yeah, the same applies like when you ask, I know sometimes you bring something up, I know we cannot do this, but, and then you go through that. One example of that I don't think I heard on Plan Commission is management plans. We have a abatement ordinance or nuisance ordinance that has, that includes a training for landers. Again, perhaps we cannot enforce it. I mean, actually looking to see if we can enforce it, but perhaps we couldn't enforce it, but just talking about it. Like that will make your project better if you have a management plan for the property. Like what is that? You know, you can get that information from the beginning, try to avoid the issues that we see once the project is working.
Yes,
So,
okay.
just even if we can enforce it, the discussion is informational and I think is valuable.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah,
I
Patrick?
think there are gray areas, though, where it's not clear that we can't do something, and that's because of the language and the standards of approval having subjectivity built into them, and it's not that easy. I mean, tearing down a giant private tree in the health, safety, and welfare, I don't know, you could argue that, and we do. So it's not always clear cut.
Well, if it were, we wouldn't need that plan.
And that's about the values you were mentioning, and maybe some of us have different values from each other, and whether alders need to change an ordinance or not and is very complicated in some circumstances.
Right. The city's currently studying ways to improve the sign-off and permitting process, and there's been feedback requesting clarification on how this information is presented. And there is, a document that Kevin will be handing out that highlights various things about what does go out to developers. One thing that I have asked be done or explored to be done is to make it clearer on the staff report what Plan Commission has authority over, so maybe 2 sections, because again, I think it's valuable to have all of the list of what developers need to do, but plan commissioners need to focus on those things that we have responsibility for and some authority over. And if we could have those in 2 different sections so it's clear what plan commissioners need to really look at and think about. The broader context is important, but to know at least. And so I've asked, and if you've got a reaction to that, or whether you agree or you think that's input, welcome.
Sorry, Liddell, are you talking about the comments, or are you talking?
I'm talking about the comments, some of which are ordinance requirements and some of which are conditions that the Plan Commission does have. Because, I mean, one of the things is some of the testimony that we get is about some of the comments or ordinance requirements that we don't have any ability really to do anything. And if it were clearer to the public, I think that some of our meetings might
Okay, that makes sense.
be a little shorter too, so.
Yes, I'd certainly agree that that would be very helpful, because it's some of the things that we could even cover in, let's say, neighborhood meetings and clarify there, and could avoid a certain amount of angst and emotion at a later point if we could make that clear.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we
Oh, I was just going to note, you had mentioned, there was an annotated approval letter that highlighted these conditions. I want to take one more look considering the error that was found in the presentation. So I will provide something and it'll be provided and it'll be up on Legistar so everybody can see, but I'm not going to hand it out tonight because I want to make sure what I hand out is correct. So my apologies for the typo in the presentation, but I want to make sure it's out there for you and for the public correctly. So look for that. Might be at a secretary's report at an upcoming meeting.
Okay, very good. Thank you. And as longer-term members of the Plan Commission know, is I do stick strictly to the 5 to 8 special meeting time frame. So that's why we're moving on. So the next item on the agenda is the agenda item 4, Legistar 84295, overview and discussion regarding notifications and communications in the development review process. And again, this is something that has come up from several plan commissioners wanting to understand better what is required and is it followed, and what is standard for alders, and knowing that it varies vastly from one alder to another about the kinds of communications that happen. And so wanting to understand better what happens for sure, what is required, what many alders do, and a way that the Plan Commission can get that information and know what has happened, because we get testimony from some people saying, you know, we didn't know anything about this. And so, you know, to try to find out a little bit more. So we do have a registrant, Alex Salutos, neither support nor opposed, and wishing to speak. Alex, you have 3 minutes.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I just want to make a real quick comment about the conditions, and particularly when you're delegating to staff something like, say, a water management plan or a traffic management plan, and that they are the ones that are going to determine whether or not the standards are met. Arguably, there's some legal risk there because you're delegating your quasi-judicial responsibility to the staff to determine if the standards were met. And if they're making a subjective judgment about, well, is this going to be adequate or not? And the public does not have an opportunity to weigh in on whether that water management plan or traffic management plan is adequate. There's some risk there. So, again, on this one, it would be helpful to know what the problem is you're trying to solve. The first item had information in it, but this one, I'm not sure what the problem is you're trying to solve or what the goal is. Regarding communication, a couple of suggestions for you. Make the signs a requirement. The process can't proceed unless a sign is posted. Make the sign larger. In other jurisdictions, they require 4x8 signs, and they're at the terrace or at the curb versus set 50 feet back on a building, and they're small and you can't see them. So the sign must be posted. Publish the DAT agendas, which gives the public an early indication that this property is in play, and we may need to start talking about this as a neighborhood and what we want to see happen there, because it can be a surprise for a neighborhood. They may not know something. So make it so that if there's something in a district, like a demolition permit, I can sign up for that and I automatically get a notice. Do the same thing with the DATs. Better educate the public about what a quasi-judicial decision is and what they should be talking about in their comments that they submit in writing and their testimony. It'll make your meetings shorter, and it will reduce frustration among the public. Instead of talking about what they want or like or think, they're going to be addressing the standards. And then don't allow the alders to waive the notice. make the notice requirement mandatory. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Okay, I'm turning again to Kevin.
Sorry, a lot of me this evening here. So, but last one, I guess, is the good news. So I think the chair did a nice job of introducing it. So I'm just going to start here with some background information, and really I'm going to talk about kind of two parts of the process. There's the formal process that the city controls, and then there's I'll say the informal process, but that's usually how neighborhood outreach can happen. Just kind of talk about some typical items and how some of those go, and then just some observations on that. And then we'll just talk, open it up generally for discussion and feedback here. So this is largely an informational item just to provide background to everybody of kind of some things that you probably know and some things that you might not be as directly involved in as Plan Commission members. So I always think about the development process in kind of three big buckets or three steps here, three phases. The one on the left here is the pre-application phase, and this is before an application is submitted. Oftentimes, this will start, at least from our standpoint, we'll get a phone call or an email from somebody wanting to ask some questions about a property or a potential development. It doesn't always start with city staff. Sometimes somebody will start with the alder. There's no regulation of who they start with, but planning and zoning staff are oftentimes a first point of contact. So we'll go through when we know, a little bit about the proposal, give some initial thoughts, what we think would be some, regulations that could come into play. At those early meetings, we do request that the applicant reaches out to the alder and provides notice as soon as possible. There's some ordinance requirements that they have to do, but that's usually one of the first things that we would say as part of the process is to kind of reach out. Once
staff reach out to the alder if the developer does not?
We would typically ask in a pre-app meeting, I would think, as far as, are you ready to reach out to the alder or would do that, or would you prefer to do that, or staff would do that? So again, it's more practice, but I think, generally, I would say more common that an applicant will talk to staff and then want to reach out to the alder themselves. In a typical process, they would reach out to the alder and kind of walk through the same things then that they previously walked through with staff. And then the alder would start, if it's a project that there's some discretion here, and again, it's on another slide, but there isn't a requirement to hold a neighborhood meeting. It's oftentimes very encouraged, good practice. There isn't a requirement to have a meeting. We can talk about some different ways meetings are held, but it's really up to the alder to decide how to hold a meeting and in what format. And we talked about the development assistance team. That's the last bullet here. That's technical meetings with city agencies to learn more about, is a proposal going to be technically feasible, or what issues might come up from a technical standpoint. That's the first series of timelines. There really isn't. The time on this can really vary as far as it could be. The requirement is that the applicant provides a 30-day notice to the alder and the neighborhood association, the business association, before filing the application. But oftentimes, a lot of these discussions are happening, well in advance of 30 days. But the city requirement is a minimum of 30 days. The second bucket is really where the Plan Commission is involved. This is when an application comes in, it's reviewed to make sure it's complete and has all the submittal requirements that we ask for. It's routed to different city agencies who do a technical review. Public hearings are scheduled, and then that phase ends with, at least for Plan Commission items, at the Plan Commission or potentially the Common Council if you're advisory to that body. As far as the timing, this is probably the most predictable from a timing standpoint. We have a published schedule. And now projects do get referred, but by and large, projects are processed on the schedule that's published. For demolition and a conditional use, not needing anything, that's about a 6-week process. If a project also requires EDC, that usually adds about 2 weeks. And then a project that could go all the way to the Common Council, it could be closer to 12 weeks by the time that a rezoning would get through the various bodies into the Common Council. So we're really talking 6 to 12 weeks here based on our published schedule. And then the final bucket is the sign-off. And permitting phase, this is where agencies will get a final set. Agencies are, one, looking to make sure that any conditions of approval are met, and then that if technical requirements, engineering and other requirements, when there's more design detail comes in, that would occur this, and then permits are issued once those plans are reviewed. So just generally at the Plan Commission level, these are the submittal requirements. And there was a link in the presentation that links to the application information, but I was going to boil it down. The list here on the screen is generally what's required. In some cases, some of these might not be necessary for all approvals depending on the scope, but a typical new development proposal, you'd have a site plan, basic grading and utility plans, roof and floor plans, elevation drawings, landscape plans, drawings, fire access plan. There's a street tree report that goes to the city forester, and then based on the type of request, there might be other information that might be required, and it's specified on that application form. And I guess just to note, I think this came up earlier, but the Plan Commission isn't seeing construction drawings. You're certainly seeing more developed drawings than we see maybe at a development assistance team or maybe even at an initial neighborhood meeting, but these aren't construction level drawings yet. Those really come in that final phase where you get final engineering and final construction drawings. So I would say maybe you're seeing on average maybe like a 70% complete plan at a typical Plan Commission meeting. It varies from application to application. Okay, so the formal requirements. I wanted to note before filing an application, the zoning code says what needs to happen. And 30 days before filing, there needs to be, and these are all prepared by the applicant, an email or a written notification to the district alder, notification to the neighborhood association where they exist. There's not neighborhood associations across the whole city, and business associations where they exist. And for demolitions, you also have to do an online notification that goes out to somebody fills it out, and then that goes out to interested parties who have requested receiving that email. This came up a little bit earlier, but the zoning code does allow the district alder to waive the 30-day notification.
Do they have to then, if the alder decides to waive it, do they have to notify the business association and the neighborhood association that they have waived it, or is not?
My take is that the notice has to be done. However, they don't have to wait 30 days to file. I think that's typically how staff have approached that, as far as that they would still be required to send the email, but they wouldn't have to wait 30 days to file the application if the waiver is granted.
Right, but what I'm asking is, does the alder have any obligation to let the neighborhood association or business association know that they're waiving the 30 days?
Yeah, no, and to be clear, staff advise that the applicant still has to provide the notice. So that notice still should be provided. It wouldn't be, the alder wouldn't necessarily have to provide that alder. That would still be on the applicant to provide that notice. It just wouldn't have to be 30 days in advance of filing.
Okay.
But that's only if a waiver is approved. And I would say technically, just to be clear on the 30-day notice, it's the district alder and plan division director would both have to grant the 30-day waiver. Now, other formal notice requirements, the city publishes a newspaper notice. It's called a Class 2. That essentially means it has to run in the newspaper 2 weeks before a public hearing. And 10 days before the hearing, the city has to mail postcards to owners and occupants within 200 feet of a subject property. That's defined in the zoning code. And those two notices are starred. If those notices don't happen, the Plan Commission can't act on an item and there can't be a public hearing. So those are rules that can't be waived.
Kevin, can I interrupt?
Yeah.
At what point, if this is a permitted use with no rezoning, et cetera, at what point do those deviate from this path?
That's a good question. If the permitted use, to Commissioner Heck's question, they really start at this third bubble. Now, they might do development assistance team, they might do other things, but they don't have a pre-application, they don't have any discretionary approvals that they need to do, presumably, so they just have to pull together their plans and submit the technical.
Alder, for instance, is not even in the loop.
Nope, there's no requirement to notice an alder for a permitted use.
Thank you.
And then to the notice plays, we just, there's a comment here. It talks about, when we get public comments, they're posted to Legistar. From an organizational standpoint, they're typically organized by group of when they come in for projects that receive lots of comments, and depending on how many comments and when they come in, they're typically organized by date. Typically, we will put them, if there's a large number of comments that come in over a weekend before a plan commission meeting, but weren't in the packet when it went out, we will highlight those as a separate file. So right here, and again, this was in the presentation that's on Legistar. These are just 2 examples of public hearing postcards that the city would send out. I think one is for a combination rezoning, and then another one is for an official map. So that's the format. So when you hear about the postcard notice, that's what those look like. And I can certainly circle back if there's questions. Again, these go out 10 days before the public hearing. And then this is a copy, an actual photograph of it's an uncompleted yellow sign, but that is the yellow sign that is posted. If it's a corner property, you need to have one on both corners of the building. This is issued by zoning. Zoning will fill out the information and hand it to the applicant. Again,
Is there any requirement about how close to the property line it needs to be, or whether it needs to be totally clear and readable? Because I know I've seen some of these signs that are posted inside behind a glass door that has bars across, so you can't really see it. Is there any kind of requirement about visibility or location?
When Katie gets back, let's ask her what's in the code. There are some, I don't necessarily think there's a dimensional requirement, but it has to be visible, I think is the language, but I'd have to look that up or defer to Katie on the specifics of what it is, but there is something about how it's displayed. This yellow sign, what the rules say is it has to be up 21 days prior to the plan commission, but as I think the commissioner is largely aware, there's language in the zoning code that says failure to post the sign would not invalidate the action of the plan commission. But it's one of those items that the plan commission could potentially refer an item if they didn't think the notice was adequate. I guess now I want to talk, maybe I'll stop there just for a quick second and that's kind of those are the formal technical notices that happen with the land use application. And then I'm going to focus on a little bit more about the neighborhood process. But anything on the formal process at this point?
Just a thought. I guess, would it be a big burden for staff to just check in with the alder when they're in the pre-application phase, to check in with the alder to make sure that the developer did indeed contact them? Or, it also might be a wake up for the alder in case it slipped through the cracks or something, but just to make sure the connection was made.
Yeah, I think where we typically would catch that would be is if we get an application and we don't have a copy of the 30-day notice. So we would catch it at that point. But yeah, we could talk about options about, again, I think it happens, but it's maybe informally in terms of reach out, as when we have our initial staff meeting to reach out.
I agree that would be a good idea. The earlier the alder knows, the better equipped they are and the more able they are to get communications out to whoever really they should be trying to communicate with in the area. So I would agree that sooner's better.
Yeah, I have a lot of commentary on this, just because I have a lot of development going in my district, and I also went through all these different scenarios, so I have some feedback. But one question that I wanted to ask is, One question is, in the transit-oriented district, is that the same thing as like, are they conditional uses, so it'd be automatically permitted? So, for example, one thing that I learned, let me just do it backwards. One thing I learned in one of the developments that happened in my neighborhood is it was like parking they didn't have to have parking at all, right? And I think that fell under conditional use. So maybe that would explain why they wouldn't have to have a meeting. Are you following me? Because we did some changes, I think in like I don't even know, I was not here, in 2019 or something, and we made things easier for, development to happen, but also within that, it's like total confusion as far as like a conditional use, what is, which I think is a permitted use as long as they meet the conditions.
There's a couple, for that one, I think that the TOD changes when they went through, they did change some of the thresholds from some items. They changed some requirements and some thresholds of things that were permitted uses, or originally conditional uses that needed to be reviewed by the Plan Commission became permitted uses in certain cases. And I think one of the parking issue is another change. If you're in the transit overlay district, there's no longer an underlying requirement to provide parking. That would be regardless if it was a conditional use that needed Plan Commission review or just a permitted use that just needed building permits and so forth. So there's a few different, there were a few different things that were, if that was the ordinance you were talking about, the transit-oriented ordinance, there are still conditional uses as part of the transit-oriented development. It's just changed some of the thresholds.
So it doesn't become a permitted use, it becomes a conditional use that it has to go through.
A conditional use would come through this body, a permitted use would not.
Okay. And then the other thing I wanted to ask, and I do have commentary, but I can hold it as you go through these different slides, is can you offer more clarification on the waiver? If it's like, one of my suggestions would be that this presentation hits council, because I don't think some of us even know this. We need to know, what do we need to do to make sure that we're doing things equally for everybody all across the board, and the public knows as much as possible of what is happening in their neighborhood. So if you could clarify on the waiving the 30 days, do I need to send an email out to the neighborhood associations or put it on the blog to say we're waiving this? I don't think it's such a bad idea. We just don't have a checklist.
Just a comment, in general, communications are a good thing. So even if it's not required that you communicate with the neighborhood association, I think that it behooves you as an alder and us as a city, if the alder is on top of those kinds of communications. And maybe some kind of alder checklist would be a good thing. I'm thinking that maybe an alder team might be the ones to put that kind of thing together. There are some alders that really do go through a lot of communication process. And they would be excellent at doing that kind of coaching, or perhaps putting together that kind of checklist. Chief of staff, yeah. Now that there's more staff for alders, that would be a good thing for that person to spearhead. So,
and just for that, there have been some discussions with council staff and planning staff about that point. I think we can go through, and I'll also invite, if you want to, give me a call, we can kind of go through this in more detail, just to kind of go through any of this. I'm happy to do that. I'll do the quick version here, and then happy to, find a time where we can reach out and talk in more detail on any of this, just so make sure that I can answer your questions fully. As far as the waiver process, there is no requirement. It's at the alder's discretion. So I just want to be very clear the alder does not have to waive it if you're asked, as far as that. Now, again, if there's ever a question, I think when we did a series of alder videos, and I think one of the points that I would reiterate to everybody is, if there's a question, you get a waiver request, you don't know what to do with it, call planning staff, and we can talk through about, this is what we know about this request or other things, just to give you, the context. We might not have all the answers, but we'll certainly let you know what we know. And I think that's an important part to just, make a decision if you think it's in that. Generally, if it's a controversial proposal, a staff would advise against not waiving it and just letting it play out and having that process. But if it's a proposal, something that's relatively simple, they've already met with a neighborhood association, they've already done some certain level of outreach. In some cases, a waiver might be more appropriate. Again, it's going to be case by case, but I would say, generally the more controversial, the larger a proposal would be, the less likely a 30-day waiver would be. Sometimes we would get a waiver that, let's just say, one instance where an alder might be asked to waive, let's say somebody's come in and they've done 3 neighborhood meetings. The alder set up a couple, they've met with other groups, and they didn't send the written notification. We get this from time to time. So they've done a lot of outreach, they didn't do the technical thing that's required. So, and there that, you might have the discussion, well, they've done the outreach, they've done the talking, they just didn't fill out the, they didn't submit the paperwork. So in that case, it might be more willing. They're all case by case basis. So I guess I could, we can talk about that, further, but I think that's the waiver in a nutshell. It's really the alder's discretion. Did you have another couple questions?
Yeah, so, I don't have questions, but I would, I want to hear the rest of this, but I have to say, when I came on, I watched the videos. I don't think that this information is there. This is so critical because we're passing stuff, and then when it goes to appeal, we're making decisions on appeal. And I have learned more tonight sitting here in Plan Commission than, well, I shouldn't say than any other time, because Alder Rummel has been so kind to mentor me through some of this. We do need a checklist. And we're getting more briefings. I know that our chief of staff is doing a very good job with making sure that we get public briefings. But I have been through about, since I've been in, maybe about 8 different notifications, and it's all over the map. And what happens is the onus becomes on the alder. So if you have my situation where they had a bunch of alders moving in and out of the district, right? Appointed, one resigned, I got elected. Stuff fell through the cracks. And I feel like I, representing the public, should know what's going on, know what's coming down the pike, and can encourage the developers to have a public meeting and engage with the community, because you not only come out with a better product, but also because they know their particular corner, and it builds trust, and it does all sorts of stuff. And so I would say the process for some is clear. If they have a mentor, that makes it so clear. But again, you have to go with the average alder. And I'm saying, even when we're not on council, let's say 20 years down the road, what is the average person going to be able to do in the 20 hours a week that's allocated, that we're paid to do work, especially with a growing city? And make sure that the process is crystal clear, and I don't have to be on Plan Commission to get it, and make sure that we're going out of our way to engage, because I've had to have some extra public meetings that weren't really public meetings, as you're going to go down here, because of this exact issue. And tonight I just figured out how one developer did what I call an in-run, E-N-D-R-U-N, end-run, around the system. And as we grow, we want to engage, even if it's a pain, and we've heard them before and whatnot. So yes, we need a checklist, and this is so valuable. I would ask that you present this to us, and I would also ask with planning that you present to us the different types of zoning that we have, so we can be looking out and making sure people are doing the right thing. We get a lot of emails. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for your comments.
Yeah.
Let's move on. And please stay at the table, so if you, yeah, okay, go ahead.
So I want to focus or talk a little bit about the neighborhood process here that happens outside of the formal city review. And I think the takeaway is it varies, and it is largely driven by the alders, kind of customizing it for what would work in a particular situation. And again, a neighborhood meeting is not required before an application is heard or filed for the Plan Commission, but they are typically encouraged. Now, there isn't a requirement to how a neighborhood meeting is organized or noticed. They could be virtual or in person. There's some limited abilities to do hybrid meetings. Usually that is based on the technology of applicant teams, as the city doesn't have the ability to do a remote hybrid meeting. So typically pick virtual or in person for one that we would be there. And I guess I'd stress here, a neighborhood community meeting should happen before an application is filed. Again, not a requirement. But when we were talking about those 3 buckets at the beginning, in that first bucket, that's typically when projects are more in a formative state before more detailed plans are done. So early is better. That pre-application phase is usually where we would recommend neighborhood meeting or meetings occur. And again, the neighborhood meetings are intended to not be a formal hearing. A formal public hearing is what the Plan Commission will hold. A neighborhood meeting is typically more interactive. An item or a development team is going to be asking questions, and there'll be a Q&A discussion with the attendees and neighbors. So as far as how this would typically work, again, an applicant would reach out to the alder, and then the alder would work with council staff on the logistics of setting up the meeting. And then typically, planning staff would be asked in some cases to attend a meeting. An alder would determine where we would send postcards. And again, it's a different postcard from the ones we showed there, which were for public hearings, but a postcard saying there's going to be a neighborhood meeting to discuss a proposal to develop let's say a 3-story, 40-unit building at this address, and have the date and the time. Typically, an applicant would pay the cost of the mailing, but that would all be coordinated through the city council office. And typically an alder would kind of draw the bubble of where the alder would think that those notices should go out. But Common Council would facilitate that mailing, but again, paid for typically by the applicant in most cases. Typically, these meetings are noticed in addition to the postcard. There might be alder blogs or other communications that the alder would use to promote that. And then if it's a virtual meeting, those are posted to the city channel website. There's a neighborhood meeting channel in the website, and you can see neighborhood meetings that the virtual ones are captured in that way. When staff is involved, this is a typical kind of overview of what one of these meetings would do. They're just usually welcome. Usually the alder would give the welcome. The alder's typically the more familiar face. If it's a Zoom meeting, we'll do a technical overview of how to use Zoom, and then staff would do an overview about the development process and just some of the technical considerations. But then largely the development team is the primary presenter. They present and then opened up for questions, answers, and discussion. So can vary, and some alders like to do some variations on that, but that's a typical neighborhood meeting agenda. Again, different approaches based on a project and an alder's preferences. Again, a lot of this could be a special meeting just on this project. There might be a regularly scheduled neighborhood meeting or neighborhood association meeting, and an item might be considered there as another option. Some neighborhood associations are quite detailed, and they'll call subcommittees, and they will have a subcommittee on development that will meet to deal with to make recommendations. So there could be a layered process within the neighborhood itself. Again, some established neighborhoods have some different subcommittees. Excuse me. And in other cases, an alder might create a steering committee of neighbors to meet with the development team, typically in advance of a Plan Commission application, and might at a first neighborhood meeting say, does anybody want to have a few more meetings with the development team? It's an option, certainly not a requirement. Probably something for a bigger, more complex proposal, but it's something that has been done in some areas. So that is, some options. Again, it's kind of a wide variety of ways that those meetings could occur. as we get comments at the staff level, we compile them, for the Plan Commission, we put them on Legistar. And so there's just the website here, pccomments@cityofmadison.com. That's the official spot to go in, but if it goes to planning staff, we'll forward it and put it together too. If they come into us, somebody has our contact information, but PC Comments is also recommended. For the Plan Commission, I think, this commission does a very good job. If you get comments before a meeting on an item, please forward those to staff. We recommend to people to send the comments directly to staff so we can distribute them. That doesn't always happen. So if you get them, forward them to staff, then we can add them to the legislative file on Legistar, so that's all compiled.
And we do have commenters sending in comments very late sometimes and sending them directly to Plan Commission members. So if you want to receive those, then you need to have your email address out on the website, but there's no requirement that you have a publicly available email address out on the website. One of the things I have done, if it's a very late comment and I notice that some people are not included on it, Plan Commissioners, I will send those comments out to Plan Commissioners to give you just a little bit more time to be able to see some of those late comments.
And then if there are comments, sometimes they're comments for the Plan Commission, sometimes they're questions of staff. And so we will direct, if it's a question that's directed, planning staff, could you explain blank, 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 we'll, respond, and might not be a comment for the Plan Commission. We'll usually check, did you want this published to the Plan Commission, or is this just something that you want to talk to us about? So we, sometimes comments come in that form as well. So in most staff reports where there is public comment, you'll notice this, and this is just an example of a staff report. There'll be a section on public comment, and it'll provide a link to the comments that we have. Oftentimes, the report's published in advance of the meeting, and in some cases we'll have comments already, and in some cases we might not have too much public comment at the time that we release the staff report. But we have a link to that, and it's a general summary just mentioning, we typically just provide a link and that we do have public comments. So it's not a long narrative or kind of debating the public comments, just indicating that it is there for the Plan Commission's consideration, usually in the analysis or conclusion sections of the staff report. So I guess I just wanted to, talk about some other communication considerations, and these are starting to get into the framing questions here. But outside of a specific project, we should think about ways to communicate the roles and limitations of the Plan Commission. I think that issues come up a couple different ways, from a variety of speakers and commissioners tonight. So just thinking about communicating what is it that the Plan Commission does, what can the Plan Commission do, and what the Plan Commission can't do, and what sort of ways do we have to kind of communicate that effectively. Second one, just talking about best practices and toolkits, and I think this is also getting at some of the issues in terms of making sure effective neighborhood meetings when held, and what are some best practices of the many meetings that.
So Kevin, you probably remember this. Back in 2005, I think it was, participating in the development process, a booklet basically that I think I found very helpful back then. It was before I was older. I was a neighborhood person at that time, and it gives information to neighborhood associations as well as alders about how to have an effective process for getting to some level, hopefully, of agreement between the neighborhood and the alder and the developer, which eases the burden then on the city process, I think. Is that something that is provided? Is it out online? Is it used at all, or?
Well, there it is online, I believe, and Bill could speak to it because I think he was more directly involved in that when that was done. I do believe it actually, it's not important here for this discussion. I do believe it won a planning award because of what it did. There are some, my one caution I would have with that being a near 20-year-old document, it references some processes that no longer are in place. Some things are the same, some things are different than they were 19 to 20 years ago. So, I mean, I think there's some good things. It's also a very comprehensive. It's a very comprehensive guide. It covers many things. I don't know if Bill had any additional thoughts on that.
Yeah, I was just going to say that was done under our old zoning code when practically every single project was a planned development and had to go through, the full process. And so it was really, there was a lot more process then.
So has there been thoughts to updating that to the current situation?
It comes up from time to time, but I don't think it's currently on any work plans. But that is really a dated document, but since Kevin said I was involved, it was a really good document.
Mm-hmm. It is.
And it was really helpful. And it was award-winning, but it is not as relevant to our current ordinances and processes as it was at the time. But
well, I would suggest that something like that would be helpful to alders, to developers, and to neighborhood associations. So to consider doing something like that.
And I think as we get into, discussion here, just thinking about the effectiveness of the required and even the other notices that aren't required but are provided, and, thoughts about how making them clear and effective, if you have thoughts on that. So the framing questions then that we have here, and again, we don't have to stick to these. We've got a little bit of time here, about 15 or so minutes before we hit the 8 o'clock hour. I don't know, Chair, you read the other ones. I don't know, I'll give you the honors if you want to introduce these.
What types of outreach and communications would be helpful to communicate the Plans Commission's roles, responsibilities, and limitations to the public? And these two framing questions are not the only questions that we can comment on or discuss. And then your ideas for how staff and applicants could best summarize public input activities associated with a particular project. Because one of the issues we have had is, or questions that routinely come up is, what communications has there been? What meetings have there been? What neighborhood associate? And there's even been disagreement between the developer and the alder sometimes about what has happened. So any ideas on either of these questions or just in general to make our communications better?
I've got a thought about that second item about, it might be awkward at times, but in the staff report, sometimes there'll be a mention of neighborhood engagement, but maybe if there have been a few meetings, why not list those dates and write in the staff report and say, these are the 3 meetings that happened. So when we get public comment that say, why weren't there any meetings, at least we know there were. Whether they were notified is a whole nother can of worms, but it might be helpful to list that.
I like that idea. Yeah, Nicole.
Kevin, I'm not sure if you could jump back to the slide with the official public notices. One of them, I'll always be the person that talks about official mapping, so thank you for including that. The notice on the right is related to official mapping. And I just think I think we've come a long ways in learning communication with the public on that, particularly, property owners where it directly impacts their property. But I would think that the notice of that could be stronger in terms of if it's a property owner that is directly impacted by it, and hopefully, most likely, they have been in contact with city staff directly as that is being prepared. But I think if you got this notice, and it's kind of, especially for official mapping for roads, they don't have a specific address. It's kind of general, and they might just be like, oh, something's going on around me, and not understand also the implications that official mapping have on your property in terms of future changes, limitations of improvement. So I just think that notice in particular has to be stronger and more clear, and maybe lead to an online resource that explains that process and the limitations that it may lead to.
So just to clarify for your idea, there's a lot of different, good ideas there, but I think at basic listing the affected property addresses where a reservation might be and a link to a map and more information with kind of getting at making that a little bit clearer. Okay.
And can I just add on to that one? For official maps, the properties that an officially mapped street is proposed on, they do get a bigger letter explaining things. This is more for, they will also get this, but this is for the broader notification, so. Sure.
I'd just like to get back to the comment that was made about a checklist for alders. I think that's a good concept that I would love to see explored by the chief of staff and maybe a small alder team, because one of my concerns is the vast difference between various alder districts throughout the city in terms of communications, meetings that are held, and to me it doesn't seem kind of fair or equitable to have that kind of really significant difference in what residents of the city are exposed to related to upcoming developments. And to the extent that there could be that kind of checklist or additional training or whatever of new alders, I think it could potentially improve that situation. It's tough because, some alders have a bit more time than other alders have, or a bit more interest, or whatever it might be. So it's tough to make it totally uniform across the city, but to the extent we could improve that, I think it would be worthwhile. Yes.
And just carrying on that thought and the alder checklist and so forth, because I think we are very dependent on the alders for part of this communication. I think one thing any of us who's now had any number of neighborhood meetings, I've had quite a few, is that there's probably no amount of generalized communication that will result in a very educated population about the process. And I think one thing that's now been in my mind is that a good part of a neighborhood meeting would be to do a review of the process as part of that meeting. And I'm glad to help my fellow alders on that now, having a little bit of experience to be able to make that happen. But I think that's impingent on us, because otherwise you just have in these meetings so many people who've never before been engaged in this process. They're just new to it. They may know almost nothing, or they make really profound assumptions that just aren't the case. So a low-key little bit of education right at the beginning, and maybe some information on how to find out more, it's probably going to be very useful early in the process. Because any of the major projects that are going to result in some amount of highly positive plus highly negative reactions on the part of the public there's almost inevitably going to be a neighborhood meeting. Sometimes it's missed and sometimes it shouldn't be, but most of the time it's going to be there, and it's a good venue for getting that information across.
Thank you. Yes. Patrick?
I guess this is for Kevin or Bill or both. I guess there are several, we heard in public comment, and we hear this often, why wasn't this information out sooner? And, you know, it's amazing we now even get staff reports a few days earlier than I think they used to come in, a couple of days. But for the public, I think it's hard for them to understand, why didn't we know these things earlier? Why didn't we get the staff report earlier? Even in the public engagement process, why didn't this happen earlier? And my understanding is oftentimes things evolve very quickly towards the end. Oftentimes, so you know, things are shifting constantly, and you don't know really when to draw the line and say this is what's being proposed. Can you speak to that a little bit about, especially from the public's point of view, I guess?
Yeah, I think just maybe note kind of what we do and kind of how it goes in the process. I mean, everything is up on Legistar, and I think people who are familiar with the legislative file system, Legistar, you know, they're going to be able to find the stuff. I think the difference is the Plan Commission will get, you know, links and agendas a couple days early to know, and you being on this body, you know that means, you know, stuff is there for review. So all of the information is, I guess what I would think is promoting on the city planning webpage and promoting, we have kind of a portal to projects that are in the development process, and that's probably, it links ultimately to Legistar, but perhaps there's a map and one can go and kind of zoom in on their area of the city and see where the, you know, particular, you know, proposals are. I think maybe just thinking out loud here, I think kind of making sure that that's known about, because that's really, there's a lot of information that's there. Our website has got a lot of information. I'm not sure, or I would say that there are ways to organize it better. And then there's certainly, you know, I would like, you know, make sure that it's promoted, that's a link and that's out there, that if you're curious about what might be going on in a certain part of the city, you can look on that map, you can click on the pin that's, you know, on your property and then get the links to the information. So there's a lot of information out there. I think it's just, you know, I don't know how widely known it's out there.
And making sure the alders know that too. I mean, because I think it would be very helpful if alders on their blog posts, and hopefully they are posting on blogs, that they would have maybe a blog post that describes the development process and points to that kind of a website. And I know that some alders have done that kind of thing. And I think it would be super helpful in getting the word out.
Why can't the staff report be posted 3 weeks before the public hearing?
Well, one of the reasons is the comments from the technical comments from reviewing agencies are typically due about a week or so before the meeting, and so compiling that's oftentimes there's a meeting. So I mean, there's a, you know, with a 6-week review, there's different things that are happening behind the scenes. So yes, ideally the reports are posted, you know, as soon as possible, but we don't have all the information till at least about a week to 10 days before the meeting, and then taking time to write them and a high volume of reports and so forth. So if the question is, I guess if the underlying question there is, you know, can we find a way to get reports out, you know, earlier than they are today, it's something we can look at. It's, you know, there's different timing considerations, but if that was something we can kind of look to see if we can find ways to make that out. 3 weeks does not, if we have a 6-week review process, I don't think having a staff report out 3 weeks in advance is typically going to be probably likely.
Yeah, so you're slowing down the process if you try to do that earlier, I guess.
Well, it would just be, we don't have, you know, we're waiting for, you know, different steps to happen throughout the process before we can kind of compile that. But
yeah, well, I would say push those steps back so that there's more time, but then you add that much to
You're adding 3 weeks on the front of the.
That's the trade-off.
But I mean, you make a good point. I mean, it's hard enough for us to review it, before the Plan Commission meeting, let alone members of the public that are interested in it to try to digest it. So, yeah, the earlier the better.
I'm not even necessarily advocating for it. I'm thinking from the public's point of view.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. So we've got 3 minutes. Anything that that needs to be said, Plan Commissioners, in the last 3 minutes? Then I would be looking for a motion to adjourn.
If I could just say one thing, I think that part of this, the key is that if we could find a system to get notifications starting when it goes to DAT, or, maybe making it that developers should go through DAT. The only question I had with DAT, for example, I just met with a developer that it's not, they haven't even gotten to DAT, and the only question I have for them now is, can I make this public that you're thinking about this? But we definitely need a checklist, and we definitely need to have a clear, hard process. I think it will cut down on our city council meetings and people being frustrated, so.
Thank you for being here, Alder. Yeah. And I do urge you to get together with Kevin or Bill for more in-depth. Okay. Motion? Okay, it's been moved and seconded, and I'm going to assume unanimous consent unless I see a raised hand to object. And thank you all for coming to this special meeting. Thank you to staff, and I didn't really say thank you to our transportation folks, but if you could relay, yeah. So thank you.